record on the computer. Okay, so we close. All right. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshor Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaudavani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Akanda Mandalakaram Yena Vyaptam Chiracharam Tat Padam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostite Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Apavitra Pavitrova Sarvavastha Gatopi Va Ya Smaret Kundarika Ksham Sa Bhayavyantara Shuchi. Well, good evening, everybody. And here we are again. And you do remember, right, after today, there's going to be a 6-week gap because I'm going to be out of the country and with not very predictable access to the web, to the internet. And so rather than sort of risk it, I thought, why not just wait till I come back? And so I'll send a message because it'll be 6 weeks, but it's all on the, everything's on the website. So if you have any, if you can't remember, just go on the website and the dates are there. So we're going to read whatever we're going to read. Vedanta Sutra is a text that people spend lifetime studying. If you go to the Udupi, the Sringeri Mats, the big centers of learning in South India, Shankara's he has 4 peeths. Shankara established 4, one in the Himalayas, Badrikashram, one in, I think it's Dwarka, one in the east, Jagannath Puri, and one in the south, Sridangam, no, somewhere further south. Anyway, established these 4 peeths, and the main one is Sringeri Mat. And these centers of learning, that's what they do. They pretty much spend a life studying the Shankara commentaries on the Vedanta. So we're just going to we'll just put, sticking our finger in. So we're just getting a little sense of it. And why should we rush through it? What will we gain? It's not about rushing through and then ticking it off a Svadhyaya list, or did this, done that. Well, that's not Svadhyaya. Better to read one verse and go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, because each verse will reveal new meanings according to wherever you're at. I really feel that. It's really been my experience. There's been times something I've read literally 1,000 times, and then one day all of a sudden I know what it means theoretically and from a jnana point of view, but it reveals its wisdom. So the texts are considered to be, take it or leave it, Shastra Avatara, a type of avatara, type of divine presence, like Om. Om is a well, I probably wouldn't call it an avatara, but very similar. It's divine presence. We could call it an avatara. It's Brahman in sonic form. So just like the deities, Ishvara manifests in the deity, manifests in mantra. So Ishvara manifests in Shastra. And if that's true, and we're going to read today that what is that Ishvara? Intelligent. What is that Brahman? Remember, right, with first verse, Atato Brahma Jignasu. The Vedanta is about inquiry into Brahman. What is the definition? Second sutra, Janmadya Yataha. What is the definition? Just like Patanjali's definition of yoga, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. What's the definition of Brahman? Janmadhyasya yataha, that from which creation and maintenance and dissolution of the universe emerges. And then Shastra Yonitvat, how do we know about Brahman? From the scriptures. Because through human empirical sense perception and inference, these are other ways of knowing. You know something from sense perception, you know something from inference, from deductive, logical, inferential reasoning. You might, remember we read the verse, you might know that there is intelligence behind the universe, but you know nothing about its nature. Could be a demon, could be maybe, could be an alien, could be two gods, could be 33 million. So therefore, the only way to know about that Brahman is through the scriptures, which are revelation. This is the whole premise of Vedanta. So from the different schools of philosophy, they're the ones that really get into how to interpret sacred text consistently. The fourth sutra, Shastra Yonitvat. Tat Samanvayat. The scripture is consistent. It may not. This is the Vedanta position. They may not seem consistent to us, but Vedanta considers them divine revelation. So if it's divine revelation, you don't want to say it's inconsistent and incoherent and contradictory, internally contradicting itself internally. So therefore, you are going to take a view as that the sacred texts are consistent. But then why do they appear inconsistent? We have to apply a lens, and then the consistency emerges. That sounds well and good, but then of course the problem arises when the different commentators apply very, very different lenses. So Shankara's lens is, wherever the scriptures talk about God as a person and the soul as an individual and the world as real, that's actually just conventional reality. And whenever the scriptures talk about Brahman as being formless and qualityless, and about the rivers merging into the ocean, and the same way the Atman merges into Brahman, that's the scripture talking from the highest perspective. So Shankara's way of resolving the contradictions that someone who's not a Vedantin would say, well, these scriptures are inconsistent. Some places Brahman is a personal being, some places impersonal, sometimes the world is real, sometimes it's false. Sometimes the soul is an eternal individual. Other times it seems, metaphors seem to suggest it merges into Brahman. Inconsistent. Shankara says no. When they talk about form, personality, individuality, that's conventional reality. But when the scriptures talk about impersonal, formless, all-pervading, no differences, advaita, no differences at all, that's the higher reality. And then, of course, Shankara then takes a further step and says the lower reality is actually never there in the first place. It was a mirage. Of course, the texts themselves never say that. But that's Shankara's lens. Ramanuja absolutely, completely and utterly disagrees with that, spends 100 pages in his first verse rebutting Advaita. For him, the highest feature of Brahman is a personal God, Narayana, personal being, with beautiful form and infinite forms, and who lovingly reciprocates with his bhaktas. So the Brahman is a personal being, and then the world is a kind of a Shakti, or he calls it the body of God, just like our soul governs our body. So the world is the body of God, and the souls are another. God has two aspects to his body. But the point is, and he's going to define, body is that which is sustained by something else. That's his definition of a body. Let's be clear about what he means by body. Body is something which is sustained by something else. So our body is sustained by our Atman. So it's not like panentheism or pantheism, that God is the world, not like that. When he uses the term the world as a body, what he means is it's sustained by something else. So Narayana sustains, there's actually two bodies, just like we have a gross body and a subtle body, and the Atman is distinct. So we can extend that metaphor that we're aware of, our own body. Well, it's not really a metaphor, it's an analogy. So God has two types of bodies. One is the souls who are always eternally individual. They never merge into God, even though they have the same qualities as God, but they're infinitesimally smaller. So they're also conscious being, but the world is not. The world is achit, the soul's a chit. The world is asat, the soul's a sat. The world is nirananda, the souls are ananda. So they're satchit ananda, but because they're tiny, tiny little sparks, God has the fullness of it. So before we move on, let's just see Ramanuja. He spent 100 pages. Hit that then. Now is it recording?
It's good. It's recording.
Yes.
Okay. So look, we're on page 78, 80. He spent 80 pages rebutting Shankara's Advaita. So why is Ramanuja's philosophy called Vishishta Advaita? Well, he says everything is Brahman, but there are three modalities of Brahman. Vishishta means differentiated. There is a difference between Brahman as God, Brahman as the individual, Atman, eternally individual, the infinite number of them, and Brahman is the world. So there's three different kind of a tripartite, there's a tripartite aspect to Brahman. And it's very similar to the Abrahamic, Christian, Jewish, and Islamic idea that there's God, there's the world, and the souls, actually. So Ramanuja maps on in terms of theology, maps on very, very closely. Of course, the Abrahamic traditions are going to freak out once you start talking about God the Father as being Narayana. And I'm writing a whole book on this. So at that point, they're going to sort of probably have there'll be resistance. But if you just instead of saying Narayan, if you just said personal, supreme Godhead, real world, real eternally real souls, well, that maps on fairly well to the infrastructure of the three great biblical traditions. So let's read Ramanuja in his own words, and then we're going to proceed. So here, this is before he starts 1.1.1. He hasn't even started the first sutra. We're on page 78. What's he been doing for 78? Rebutting Advaita Vedanta, saying, how can you say the world is unreal? If you say it's unreal, why does it appear real? You say Maya. Well, what is Maya then? Maya must be real in some sort of way to make the world appear like it's not. So where is the Maya? Where are you going to locate it, Shankara? Is Maya in Brahman? It can't be in Brahman, because Brahman, by its very definition, is pure knowledge, pure eternal knowledge. There's no room for Maya in it. Maya means avidya. So if something is vidya, you can't have avidya inside vidya. It's an oxymoron. It's like saying darkness in the sun. How can you do that? So where is this Maya, Shankara, says Ramanuja? Can't be in Brahman, because the very definition of Brahman is that which transcends Maya, that is pure knowledge, pure awareness. It can't be outside of Brahman, because then you've created a dualism. You want to be a non-dualist, Shankara. You can't locate Maya outside of Brahman, because now you've got two things. You've got Brahman and Maya, and you can't say Maya covers a part of Brahman, because then you've created an internal dualism. The part of Brahman that's covered by Maya and part of Brahman that isn't. So this is going to be the big point that the Vaishnavas are going to keep pushing at across the centuries. So let's see how, let's just in his own words, having spent 78 pages rebutting Shankara, he sums up at the bottom of 78. To sum up, texts declare a threefold classification, and they're all real. Shankara has twofold: conventional reality, unreal, illusion, mirage. And that's where there's individuality in a world with names and forms. What do we mean by names and forms? It's a term that you find in the Vedanta, in Shankara especially. If there's an object in the world, then it has a form. Otherwise, if it didn't have a form, you wouldn't perceive it. So any object has a form. If there were no forms, then there would just be one universal essence with no distinction, which actually Shankara says is what ultimate reality is. He says ultimate reality is formless, just pure, all-pervading, infinite consciousness. That's real. That's the ultimate reality. But in conventional reality, because of Maya, okay, he doesn't, then the world appears to be a place full of forms. There's trees, there's mountains, there's oceans, there's blades of grass, there's you with your form, me with my form. It's infinite forms out there. Any object is a form. Form means a distinct object, distinct from something else. if it's distinct, it must have a property that makes it distinct. It must have a shape or a form. Now, if something has a shape or a form, then you can give a name to it. You just say, well, let's call that a tree. Anything which, has roots, and whatever your definition is. Anything that has roots and branches, let's call it a tree. Anything which comes up with a little flower, with some color and scent, we'll call it a flower. Anything which has got, liquid in it, they call it an ocean. So you give it a name. So that's what name and form means. Name and form means the world out there. For Shankara, the whole world out there with its names and forms is unreal. Just like the names and forms of a mirage are unreal. You're in the desert, there's no water, but because of dehydration, you think you see forms of water and trees and an oasis and some dates in the tree. And then you say, oh, and then you give names to it. Oh, look, there's water and camels, but it's unreal. And of course, Ramanuja is going to argue against that. All of Shankara's arguments is going to argue against. I'll just give you one example, and then we'll go back and read what Ramanuja's summing up. If you see a mirage in the desert, it's unreal. Yes, you're projecting it, but you can only project it because you have a memory in your head of a real lake, a real trees. You can't project something unless it's already there. You can't project. There's no magic. So anything that's projected means you have a mental imprint of it. And if you have a mental imprint of it, it means there's a real lake somewhere, not there in the desert, but maybe a year ago or before you went to the desert, or when you were a little boy or girl, you saw a lake with palm trees. So you can only project something if that thing had, even though it's inappropriate to project it into the desert, it must have a real existence. That's for you to even know it. But to know it, then it must have contacted your senses must have contacted it, and there's an imprint of samskara on it. Only when there's a samskara can then you project it inappropriately. That's a second issue. But the original samskara must correspond to a real thing. So that's an example of the kind of arguments that Ramanuja is going to direct against Shankara. So we're not going to read the arguments because there's 84 pages, and that would just take us a week to just read those. Now he's summing up his position. Right? The whole issue, the whole problem is because the texts say different things in different places. And Shankara says when they're talking about form and name and individuality, then that's the world of mirage. When they're talking about formlessness, qualitylessness, just a universal, non-differentiated, what does that mean? No differences, just infinite pure consciousness. That's the ultimate world. So so now Ramanuja has to deal with those texts. The texts declare a threefold classification. What are the texts? The Upanishads. All this is based in the Upanishads. What's the threefold classification? Matter, individual souls, and Brahman, meaning the personal Narayana. So what's matter? Matter, the object of enjoyment. What are the souls? The enjoyers. And what's Brahman? The ruling principle. That's God who oversees everything. He gives the soul free will. You want to try and enjoy the world of matter? Go ahead. And according to your karma, you get a body, you get senses. Off you go, try and enjoy the world. Bhoga. And according to how you interact with the world, like Patanjali says, punya, you either act in pious ways or impious ways, and then you get hlada paritapa. You get good or bad karma, and then you get the next birth, and it goes on and on and on and on until you get fed up, till you realize there's no happiness, and there's not the ultimate happiness. All happiness in the world is temporary, but we seek ultimate, permanent. That's why we're never fulfilled, my friends. So matter, individual souls, and Brahman. What is matter? The object of enjoyment. Can everybody read? Souls are at the bottom of the left page. The enjoyers, and Brahman, the ruling principle. There has to be something ruling it. There has to be something controlling it. The souls are being controlled by Maya. We're not in control. It's absolutely ludicrous to think we're in control. So therefore, there are powers that control us, and there must be a ruling principle controlling those powers, the Maya and the Shakti. So, matter and souls, which other texts declare to be connected with Brahman as its body. So it's a metaphor of the body. In other words, the body cannot function without the soul. The body is distinct from the soul. We're talking about our bodies now, our little bodies. The body requires the soul. The soul does not require the body, but the body requires the soul to function. So in the same way, extending the metaphor to God, the body and the souls, they require God in order to do anything. Even the souls require God. And God puts them together with their bodies, the object of enjoyment. And if they surrender to God in bhakti, then God bestows liberation. All of this is under the control of God. And he calls that rulership, the ruling principle. And then he quotes some verses. It is therefore the self of everything, the Brahman Narayana, the inner ruler. And then he gives all these verses. He likes this one a lot, 5 lines, 6 lines down. He wished, may I be many. And so on. So he gives all these verses to support his way of reading the Upanishads. Shankara will bring forth different verses which support his two-tiered. The two-tiered, one which is real and ultimate and true. The other one is a mirage, superimposition. Okay, he likes the word superimposition. When you see the mirage, it's not there. You're superimposing it. You're projecting it out of your head, out of your memories. You're projecting it. You're hallucinating. Hallucination is, he likes to think of it as a superimposition. You're imposing it super on top of. So these texts on the right-hand side now also uphold the threefold entities, essentially distinct in nature from one another, not temporarily. Shankara will say you temporarily seem to be distinct, but when you become enlightened, all distinctions fade away, all names and forms melt, dissolve, and all that is left is all-pervading, formless, non-differentiated, no distinctions. Ramanuja says they're essentially distinct. Essentially means eternally, not temporarily. If something essentially is something, then that means it can never change. The soul, by its very makeup, is an individual and eternal, which is what Sankhya says, which is what yoga says, which is what all of the 6 schools of Indian philosophy say, except for the sub-branch of Advaita Vedanta. All the other schools, the soul is an individual. Eternally, essentially. Essentially means eternally. So they are essentially distinct from one another. And then he quotes more texts. Remember, this is Vedanta. You got to quote texts. If it's yoga, you can quote your meditative experience. But Vedanta is all about the interpreting the text. So he brings forth some more verses like let me enter these 3 divine beings, right? So he likes these verses which have the word 3. Right, let's jump a bit. Brahman is in its causal or affected condition, according as it has for its body, matter, and souls, either in the subtle or gross state. So Brahman has, in between creative cycles, the world dissolves, and the souls are in a kind of hibernation, like deep sleep, except it lasts for billions of years. And then the next cosmic, so at that point, they're in their causal state, meaning they haven't manifest their effects. Just like a seed is causal. It hasn't become a tree yet, but it's causal. It has treeness within it, latent within it, waiting for the spring and the rain and the sun and the right conditions. Then the seed, which has been a cause, let's say you put it in the fall, you put in a seed, right? People, gardeners plant their seeds in the fall, all right? So those seeds go into the ground or bulbs or bushes, whatever you're doing, and they remain in a dormant state. Well, they're causal. What does causal mean? A cause is something which produces an effect. But until it produces the effect, it's in a causal state. It hasn't become the effect. There hasn't become a tree yet. So that's what he means by causal. So therefore, and then when they manifest, then in the world, when the gunas are still between cosmic cycles, no creation. Just the sattva, rajas, and tamas neutralizing each other. Actually, it's really tamas that's neutralizing rajas. So then, but it's causal. At any moment it can spring, and all of the Sankhya categories emerge, and they become the effects, the qualities, the mahabhuta. So that's what Ramanuja is talking about. And so but the effect is non-different from the cause. I mean, the tree really, in one sense, is not different from the seed. There's a connection. You only get one effect from the cause. If you put an apple tree in the ground, you only get an apple tree. You don't get a banana tree. You don't get a chimpanzee. You don't get any, gold. So there's a relationship between the effect and the cause. So you can say in one sense they're non-different, but in another sense they're different. And that's Ramanuja's Vishishta Dvaita. That's why he keeps the Advaita. Why does he keep the Advaita? He's so opposed to Shankara's Advaita. He's saying, no, we just don't understand Advaita like he does. Shankara wants to say everything is illusory and a mirage. He says, no, we accept everything is Brahman, so it is Advaita, but the Brahman has Vishishta. Vishesha means distinction. A Vishesha is a distinguisher in Indian philosophy. So if Brahman is Vishishta, it means it has been distinguished. There are distinctions within it. Back to the tripartite. Is everybody doing okay with this? Are you getting it, Jane? Yeah? Bay, are you getting it? Yes? Marcia? Bea? Yeah, can we keep going? Okay, I mean, I'm repeating myself, but Mary Fleming got on my case. She said people are still confused about it. So that's why we're going on, we're banging away at this. Right. So the effect in one sense is non-different from the cause, but not like in the way Shankara wants it. Shankara says it's non-different. Well, Shankara says it doesn't even exist. There is no effect. And if there's no effect, there's no cause. So what is there then? Just Brahman. So for Shankara, the whole notion of cause and effect is a duality. And therefore Shankara just says, ultimately, there's no cause and effect. But we'll read some stuff. Okay. Right. So what are we going to do? What is Ramanuja going to do with the verses that talk about Brahman without qualities? He's got to account for those. You can't just accept some verses and not others. If you're a Christian, like a real committed Christian, you can't just say, well, I don't like this statement in Luke, and I don't like this other one. No, you either take it all or you don't. If you want to be a Christian, I mean, I suppose you could say, oh, chop. Well, a Vedantin certainly wouldn't pick and choose. So what are you going to do with the texts which talk about Brahman without qualities? Qualities means colors, forms, shapes, dualities. So he says texts which teach that Brahman is without qualities teach that it is free from evil qualities. So now he says, well, so the opponent says, well, what about all these texts that say it doesn't have qualities? Ramanuja says it doesn't have material qualities. It doesn't have material quality. He says evil here, like, the kleshas doesn't have those kinds of qualities, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have divine qualities. It does have divine qualities. Okay. So then he quotes a few more verses, and we're almost finished. Oh, no, we've gone backwards. Okay. All right. Well, I don't know whether that was any use to you, but
yes, a lot, Edwin. We need clarification.
Oh, okay. So if you want to read a tiny bit more, so then he goes on explaining how some texts talk about the Brahman. Okay, let's skip all that. So let's see how he concludes it. Last paragraph before he move on, and unfortunately, it's a little bit. I guess one of the work study students didn't do a good job xeroxing this. Bondage is real. It's not an illusion, as Shankara would say, and is the result of ignorance, which is the nature of karma without a beginning. What is ignorance? Why are we in ignorance? Avidya is a klesha, and the kleshas are the result of karma. Patanjali tells us that, right? The kleshas, karma shaya, drishta janma vedaniya. So therefore, we're in ignorance, this bondage. Bondage means when we act in ignorance, we think we're body mind, then everything we do, we own it. Everything is causal, and all causes have an effect. Just like with the apple tree, you put an apple seed in, you get an apple tree. You don't get a pear tree or a banana tree. So if I act piously, that's causal. I get pious effects. If I act impiously, Patanjali says punya, punya, but more common terms would be dharma and adharma, much more common, and Gita, of course, will use those terms, dharma and adharma. So if it's cause and effect, everything's cause and effect. Why is there going to be snow here? Or because whatever it is, some currents in the ocean, maybe some wind coming down from the steppes of Russia, whatever the reason is, there's causes and effects. All reality, you couldn't have science if you didn't have cause and effect. You couldn't have philosophy if you didn't have cause and effect. If there's no relationship between effects and causes, then you could never know anything, because it could just be random. So the only way we know things is we look at the effects and we determine patterns. Wherever there's these kinds of effects, then these are the causes. And so that's how science and philosophy can proceed, with this universal principle of cause and effect. If you eliminate that, you can have no knowledge, because then anything could happen at any time. If something happened without a cause, then anything could happen anytime. An elephant could pop out of your living room. So in order for there to be a sane, regulated, observable world that we can, think, if I go out of my front door at 9 o'clock, the world is out there. The only way there can be that one can function sanely is if everything is governed by cause and effect, which it is. No one denies that. Maybe now with quantum mechanics, that could still be governed by cause and effect. That's still a mystery. But many scientists are not willing to give up that notion of cause and effect. You can have no science without cause and effect. Okay, so therefore, ignorance is the nature of karma without a beginning. This is a little hard to accept, because this breaks the principle of cause and effect. I've just said how everything is cause and effect. So then if you say, what was the cause of us being in samsara? Well, then you say you did something in a past life. Well, what was the cause of that past life? Cause, okay, at some point, either you say there was an initial cause or you don't. And either way, you're going to run into problems. If you say there was an initial cause, let's go with the Christian idea of the Garden of Eden. So that kind of satisfies we can't think except in cause and effect. So in that story of Garden of Eden, there's a cause. I mean, we might not like the story, but let's forget that. Forget the content of the story. Adam did something causal, and the effect was he and his descendants were relegated to dig the earth by the sweat of samsara. Let's call that samsara. There's a cause and effect thing there. The Vedantins and Buddhist Jains, no Hindu would accept that, because you can, if that's a perfect place, how can there be any imperfection there? Even if you say it's free will, you have free will, but how would your free will even conceive of imperfection or disobedience, or however you want to frame that? There would be no samskara, there would be no object that could create a samskara of disobedience or imperfection that would make you fall. They would just find that incomprehensible. If a perfect place is a perfect place, you may have free will, fine, but there's absolutely no scope for any awareness, your pure awareness. Your pure awareness. So how can impurity enter pure awareness? Where's that impurity? You can't say impurity is in the kingdom of God or in Brahman, because then that makes Brahman now impure, or at least with some element of impurity, even if it's just 1%. So they would never accept that. They would say that goes against the very nature of Brahman, which is 100% pure, and consciousness is pure prior to embodiment. Consciousness itself is pure. So if pure consciousness is in pure Brahman, there is no impurity that could enter to cause it to fall down. So there is no causal moment. There's no moment when, Jim, 100,000 lifetimes ago, snuck out and had a little nibble at an apple. There can be no such imperfection. So therefore, if there's no causal incident, and if the soul is eternal, you're left with this rather unsatisfying option, which is you've always been in samsara. Why is that unsatisfying? Because then you think, well, I did nothing wrong. Why am I stuck in the prison house of samsara when I never did anything? So I'm not saying that's satisfactory, but from a Vedanta point of view, it's better than trying to say you fell from some ideal place. And they certainly wouldn't accept the soul it was created. They're going to have a ball. They're going to have a field game with that. Anything created can be destroyed, number one. Number two, if God creates all the souls, they should all be created equal then. If they're all created equal, they would all be exactly the same. They'd all be pious. Why was one soul impious, another one not impious? They would just find that absolutely. In fact, it's really interesting to see the early pundits, you know, when the Portuguese, the 15th century, when they first encountered Christianity, it's so interesting to see how they just couldn't make head or tail of some of the aspects of they like Jesus Christ, by the way. They never had a bad thing to say about Jesus Christ. They thought he was a Mahapurusha, a great being. But but the theology, they got they were like, you know, kind of convoluted. You know, how could a soul be created? And even if it was created, well, they should all be the same. Otherwise, God is unjust. Then He made some pious and some impious. If you only have a one life model. Anyway, let's get back to Ramanuja. So Brahman is real, the result of ignorance, So this bondage can be destroyed only through knowledge. That is to say, through the knowledge that Brahman is the inner ruler, different from souls and matter. So bhakti requires difference. Bhakti is a relationship between bhakta and Bhagavan. You cannot have bhakti. So Shankara says, yes, you can have bhakti in the world of illusion, but there's no bhakti in the ultimate reality because there's no distinction between bhakta and Bhagavan. There's no actions like doing bhakti. So bhakti then for Shankara is only a method, a means. It's not the end result. But in Ramanuja, the souls are eternal, Bhagavan is eternal, so bhakti can be eternal between them. So therefore, this knowledge, okay, so the knowledge is to know that there is a God eternally. That's true knowledge. And notice he's not saying knowledge is the Atman. He's not saying like Shankara and the Atman traditions are going to say knowledge is the Atman. No. Bhakti, yeah, they don't deny that. But that's not the ultimate knowledge. The ultimate knowledge is that there is a Bhagavan that's sustaining the Atman. So therefore, knowledge, how do you read it again? This bondage, right? You and I were in bondage. This is bhakti philosophy. All bhakti philosophy accepts Ramanuja was the first bhakta to really philosophize bhakti. I'm not saying bhakti goes back, but it wasn't really theologized in such a robust way. Just like Christian theology goes back to Origen, 3rd century. So theology, Christian theology, with two centuries after Christ, before you really start having theologians who are philosophers applying, Greek philosophy, Aristotelian categories, Platonic categories, but in support of the God of the Old Testament and Jesus of Nazareth. So as that's the case, and of course, then Augustine becomes, in the 6th century, and then Aquinas, they become these great. So Ramanuja is the first person in the Vedanta tradition to, Bhakti obviously precedes him, just like the Old Testament preceded, Augustine and Aquinas, but he's the first person to really apply rigorous philosophical categories to it. So this knowledge alone, not knowledge of the Atman, knowledge of Brahman, who is a personal being, such knowledge alone leads to final release or moksha, not any other path. And this knowledge is attained through the grace of Ishvara. It says the Lord here, Ishvara. It's grace, my friends. Pleased, how do we get it? Pleased by the performance of daily duties prescribed for different castes and stages of life. But now remember the Gita, no attachment to the results. So you do your duties, but then he says, duties performed not with the idea of attaining any results, but with the idea of propitiating the Lord. This, by the way, is the difference between karma yoga and bhakti yoga. Karma yoga, you act in the world, but no attachment to the fruits, but you could be an atheist. Bhakti Yoga, you act same as the same action without attachment to the fruits, but you're doing it to please your beloved Bhagavan. Everything you do, you're in your mind, you're offering it. You're finding a way to offer it. If you're doing that sincerely, Bhagavan will then guide you. Okay, don't do this, don't do that. You know, it's not like you can do anything. You can't go around murdering babies and offering up to Bhagavan. Although, you know, knowing India, there probably is some form of goddess Kali, some form of Bhadrakali that might even accept that. So certainly there are forms of Bhadrakali that accepts human sacrifice. So, but obviously I'm being, you know. So this is bhakti, Ramanuja's bhakti. So what do? It's duties performed, not with the idea of attaining any results, but with the idea of propitiating the Lord. Works done with the desire for results, right? So if you know, karma without the R, K-A-M-A, which means raga, then you get the results. But kar with an R, karma, then if you offer it to Bhagavan, then there's no reaction. So works done with a desire, the kleshas, with a desire for results, what happens? You lead to impermanent results. Good or bad. Good, if you do good action, you get good results, but it's all temporary, it's impermanent. You know, why is everything suffering? Because everything's impermanent, my friends. And so sooner or later, even with the best karma, we're thrown into a state of discontent. So while those perform with the idea of pleasing the Lord, Ishvara, if we act with the intention of pleasing the Lord, they result in the knowledge of the nature of devout meditation. Devout, meaning bhakti, devotional, which in turn leads to the intuition of, meaning the real awareness of Brahman as the inner self, distinct from us. Look, different from souls and matter, up the top of 81. This leads to moksha. As the due performance of the duties. Okay, that's it. All right, so hopefully that's clear now. So think of it like this. Tripartite Brahman, 3 parts. Tripartite. What are the 3 parts? Narayana, God, world, soul, eternal. Three you know, pronged ontology. Ontology means the ultimate nature of things. Shankara, 2 tiers. Now, why tiers? Because one is higher than the other. What's the highest? Formless, qualityless, just all-pervading, infinite Brahman. What's the lower? It's the world, forms, names, individuality, and not just that it's lower, my friends. It's false. It never was. It doesn't exist. It is asat. So he has, you know, obviously has a lot of work to do then to explain Maya. And his opponents are going to, you know, press away on that. Okay, so we go on with our Yoga Sutras, and we're going to go on to verse number 5 now. So we know that Brahman is the source of creation. We know that it can be only known through scripture. Otherwise, all we can do is make some vague inferences about it. We can know there's something, some kind of intelligence, right? Like my dad, when I ever tried to talk to him, he would say, well, you know, there's something there. There's something there. And, you know, and he knew there was something there, but you know, he just got on with his, you know, dharma. He wasn't a philosophical person. So you can know there's something there, but you don't know anything more than that. And something being, okay, now let's get to the next verse. So verse 3, only the scriptures reveal that if that being reveals itself if it chooses to, which of course, all right, now verse number 5. Is there anything else we can know about Brahman? Ikshater Na Ashabdam. On account of thinking, that which is not based on the scriptures, pradhana, is not the sat mentioned in the scriptural text relating to the first cause. You see all these words here, 3 lines? The translator's got 3 lines here, like 30 words. Ikshater Na, 3 words in the sutra itself. All it says is because of perceiving, not from the non-scripture. Ashabdam, from the not scripture, not because of perceiving. That's what the sutra says, my friends. You couldn't make head or tail of that. But what it is, the Sankhya tradition are going to say, right? There's two schools of Sankhya. Yoga comes out of Sankhya. There's theistic Sankhya, like Patanjali, where there's Ishvara, and there's non-theistic Sankhya. Non-theistic Sankhya, no Ishvara. So in non-theistic Sankhya, the world comes out of Prakriti, which is also known as Pradhana. You might like to make a note of that, my friends, because the Vedanta tends to use the term Pradhana rather than Prakriti. So write down Pradhana, and it's just it is Prakriti, nothing other than Prakriti. Right. Sankhya says the world comes out of Pradhana, and the Sat that the Upanishads talk about, the Satchidananda, the Sat is Prakriti. For Vedantins, the Sat is Brahman. Okay, but now they have the objector. Remember the objector? This time the objector is Sankhya philosopher, non-theistic. They don't accept Brahman and Ishvara. They just accept Purusha and Prakriti. That's it. Because the Purushas and there's no Ishvara, there's no brother, so they don't accept Brahman. They don't no talk of Brahman in the Sankhya Sutras. Even Patanjali doesn't use the term Brahman. Have you noticed? No Brahman in Patanjali, uses the term Atman. So there are different schools, my friends. All right, so let's see. And let me just get mine, because I made a note, because we're not going to be able to read everything. So let me see what I erased so that we can jump. All right. So it has been stated earlier, page 89, that Brahman, which is taught as the cause of the world in texts like this TAI, is Taittiriya Upanishads. Not the very oldest, but one of the older ones. In the Taittiriya, section 3, verse 1, it says that Brahman is to be inquired into. And that's actually, that Taittiriya is the textual source for Vedanta's definition of Brahman in Sutra 2. That Brahman is that from which creation comes. Why do they define it like that? Remember, Vedanta doesn't see itself as doing anything new. Every verse in Vedanta is a verse from the Upanishad, so they can't come up with a new definition of Brahman. They can't say, well, we think Brahman. No, they have to quote the scriptures. So they quote the Taittiriya Upanishad, which says that from which this world and all beings spring. Okay, remember that about Vedanta. Not every single 550 sutras, every single sutra is connected to a verse that needs clarifying in the Upanishads. Okay, so, all right, we're just going to forge on. So it has been stated earlier that Brahman, which is earlier meaning Sutra number 2, when the definition of Brahman, Sutra number 2, that from which the creation comes, it was stated earlier, that's the earlier, the Brahman, which is taught as the cause of the world in Taittiriya Upanishad, is to be inquired into. And the Taittiriya says, yes, my son, you should inquire into that. Now, in this and the following sutras, it is declared that these texts do not refer to the inert pradhana and such other entities which rest on inference alone, right? So Sankhya says the world comes from pradhana, not from Brahman, right? So this verse is going to refute that, okay? And Sankhya does not quote scripture. It's a rationalist tradition. Everything in Sankhya is inference, deduction. So it's proto-science. It's kind of rationalistic. And Vedanta doesn't have a problem with reason. You can see they're engaging reason with great brilliance and erudition. But Vedanta's going to say reason can only take you so far, my friends. You can't know the nature of the truth. You can know there is a truth. You can even know it must be intelligence because it must have organized the universe. If there are laws and systematized patterns like gravities and nuclear forces and the laws of karma. There must be some intelligence that put it all together, so you can get that far. So Sankhya says, well, yeah, that's as far as where we want to go. Sankhya says we don't need to talk about Ishvara and all that. We don't. Inference does not require us to accept an Ishvara. Okay, so then it is taught in the Chandogya Upanishad that Sat, existence, Sat alone. Now he's quoting the Chandogya. Here's a quote that Sankhya is going to understand this in its own way. Sat alone, my dear, was this at the beginning, one only, without a second. It thought, may I become many and be born. It created fire. That's the verse. Now, what's the problem? A doubt arises whether the word Sat refers to Brahman or the Pradhana, which we know it means Prakriti, of the Sankhyas as the first cause. Everybody following? Prakriti exists, so it has Sat, and it's eternal, actually. It may go through creative cycles. It may lie dormant for billions of years until the next cycle, but it's real. So it has Sat. Sat simply means existence. So the Sankhya people say, even though they're not really interested in scripture, they don't reject the scripture. That's how they're Vedic. If they totally rejected the scriptures, then they would be like the Buddhists or the Jains, and they'd go off and start some non-Vedic tradition. But if you want to be Vedic, you have to accept the scriptures. Some accept them, but they're not really interested in them. They never quote them. But sometimes they do, like here. They'll say, well, that's Sat. Yeah, you people think, you Vedantins think that Satchidananda's Brahman. Well, we don't have to accept that. We think Sat refers to Prakriti. Okay, because Prakriti has Sat insofar as it has existence. Right. So that's the Purva-paksha, the opposing point of view. That's the doubt. Let's keep going. The Sankhya say that it refers to their Pradhana, their Prakriti, for it is but natural that the inert Pradhana, between creation, before creation, Pradhana is inert. What is it, Pradhana? It consists of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas in a state of equilibrium. So they exist, but there's no creation because they're just in equilibrium. Nothing's triggering movement, right? Or Aristotle's prime mover, something must be causing the movement. So in between cycles, it's just inert. Equilibrium means, as I said before, that Tamas is neutralizing Rajas. Rajas wants to act. The minute Rajas becomes dominant, then there's creation, because it churns. Rajas is like churning the milk, and then you get yogurt, and then you get butter, and things kind of churn out, progressively denser, right? You get milk, and you churn it. Then you get yogurt, and then you keep churning that, and then you get something thicker, butter. You keep churning that, you get toffee, even thicker. So you think of the Sankhya charts, you get your subtle mind and intelligence, and then it becomes the qualities. Eventually it becomes the elements, the 5 Mahabhutas, and the thickest of all is earth. So that's what the Sankhya's, that's their metaphysics. That's how the world is created. It's churned out progressively, denser and denser emergence from the primordial 3 gunas. Prakriti is the 3 gunas. Same thing. Prakriti is the 3 gunas. Not that there's Prakriti and then there's 3 gunas or something else. No. You can say 3 gunas, you can say Prakriti. They call it Pradhana. Right then. So that's what the Sankhya says. It's just in a state of equilibrium, can alone be the cause of the material world, made up of these 3 gunas, and not Brahman, which is an intelligent principle. So the Sankhya say the world is, the world of matter is matter, so it must come from matter. Go back to your cause and effect. Go back to your cause and effect. The effect must have the same nature as in some sort of way as the cause. But matter is inanimate. So how can it come out of animate, conscious, intelligent Brahman? It's dead. It's just innate matter. So therefore, its cause must also be inanimate, and that's Prakriti. So that's the argument of bit like Big Bang, a physicalist today would say everything comes from, gravity, it just material forces. And because, so because there's atoms and forces right at the primordial beginning, right after the split second, the earliest, proto, whatever, helium, whatever, in the first instant, these forces are already generated. And then the world then, after 8 billion years or whatever it is, it's the same thing, really. It's the same atoms and forces, but just combined in the world that we see. But the source is ultimately the same, of the same nature. Right after the Big Bang, of course, nobody knows, how everything could come from that singularity. That's another story. So that's the Sankhya position. And by the way, Vedanta position is completely and utterly relevant to today. If you just replace subatomic particles and forces and replace it with sattva, rajas, and tamas, that doesn't matter. In other words, what is it? Okay, you call it sattva, rajas, and tamas, or call it subatomic particles and forces. That doesn't matter. But the arguments against non-intelligence being the cause, matter being the cause, the Vedanta arguments are just as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago. Perhaps you'll see that as we go along. Right. So, all right. The cause and effect, says Sankhya, we're talking about cause effect, must be of like nature, for the effect is nothing but the cause in another condition. Right? So if you have a golden ornament, well, a golden ornament is the effect, and the cause is a lump of gold. Or a clay pot is the effect, and the cause is clay, but they must have the same nature. So even though the gold now takes a shape and it becomes a necklace, and the clay takes a shape, and so there's a little bit of difference in the quality, but the substance must be the same. So if matter is inanimate, its cause must be inanimate. How can you have inanimate matter coming from unconscious matter, achit? How can you have achit matter coming from chit, consciousness? That's the Sankhya position. Okay? Cause and effect must be, if not, it can't be identical, otherwise it'd be the same thing. They wouldn't be cause and effect. But they must be very closely connected, maybe with some change, a few change of superficial characteristics. But the substance, this is the point, the substance has to be the same. Right. So we're still in the Purva Paksha. Everybody remember what the Purva Paksha is? Opposing point of view. Purva, other, Paksha, view. And remember, every sutra, there's always the Purva Paksha. These traditions, all of them, they're not dogmatic. They're not just like, this is what we say, we don't want to hear anybody else's view. Absolutely not. They're always engaging the opposing point of view. And this created a very amazingly rich intellectually stimulated environment. And great schools of thought emerged from this constant interaction with the opposing points of view. Right then. Moving on. And then he quotes some verse. Okay, and then we don't need to read the verses from the Upanishad. So let's go down. Right, answer. The sutra refutes this view and declares that the word sat, existence, in the Chandogya text refers to the Brahman as the first cause and not to Brahma. Like the whole discussion about this word sat, existence, because matter exists and consciousness exists. So Pradhana says we can account for this word sat because Prakriti is sat, and that's true. So, but Ramanuja says no, the word sat in this case, in the Chandogya text, refers to Brahman as the first cause and not to Pradhana. Why? But the text later said it thought. Now the thinking can be predicated only of a conscious subject and not of the inert pradhana. This is the argument. Matter is unconscious, it cannot think. Thinking is a property of a conscious entity. That's his argument. The Sankhya wants to say that's Sat in the Upanishads. We can lay claim to that as good as you. You want to say it's Brahman? Well, we're going to say it's Prakriti because it exists. Ramanuja says he doesn't disagree with that argument that Prakriti has Sat. He's not disagreeing with that. He's saying yes, but the passage which has the word Sat goes on to say it thought. That disqualifies any non-conscious cause for the world. Therefore, the cause of the world thinks. So this is kind of intelligent design, my friends. Okay? So it thought. And then he goes on, all right. And I hope that's just the main point right there. Right. So, okay. So why don't we, where did I write down our verses? So we're going to go from 1.1.5. And I don't think I don't think Shankara says anything particularly different. So I'm not sure we really need to read Shankara for 1.1.5. Okay, this is Shankara. Right, so the verse says, okay, see this translator of Shankara, he hasn't stuck all the words in. It's much closer to the text. Ikshater, on account of thinking, it is not Ashabdam, not based on the scriptures. Do you know what Ashabdam, not based on the scriptures, refers to? Sankhya. Because Sankhya, everything they do is not based on the scripture from a Vedanta point of view. All of that Sankhya chart that's in the back of your yoga books, that's all by inference, deduction. So the Sankhyas are sometimes called the non-scripture people. The people, the Sankhya doesn't reject scripture, they're Vedic, they don't use it. They formally accept it, otherwise they would be like the Buddha, you have to go off and start your own religion. They're Vedika. So sometimes the Vedantins call them Ashabda. Shabda are the sacred texts. Shabda is Agama in Patanjali in verse 5. Okay? So, but the Sankhya people don't, they accept it formally. They go Namahana, but they don't give a damn about it. Unless it's convenient, and they might pull out a verse and say, well, look, even your Sat, we can take advantage of that. So they might refer to a verse if they think it supports their point of view, but they're not really interested in it. Okay, so they're called the means not Shabda. So therefore, Vedanta says no. We're still on the cause of the universe. What is Brahman? That from the cause of the universe, that from which maintenance creation emerges, and then they have to rebut. They have to respond to Sankhya. Sankhya says, no, the cause of the universe is Prakriti. What do you need Brahman for? Right. So the first cause is said in the scriptures to have willed or thought before creation. And Shankara quotes some verses. This is a quote from a verse. This universe, my dear, same one, Ramanuja. Right. All right, he doesn't say anything. Basically, the Sankhya people are going to say, I don't want to get into it. It's not enough. We don't get enough. And we're already, we've already spent an hour, my friends. I'm not going to rush it. I mean, I kind of am rushing. I mean, we're skipping an enormous amount. I'm not going to water it down any more than this. This is Vedanta. Want to do Vedanta? I mean, all we're really doing is getting a sense of the text, and you can decide if you want to pursue deeper studies. It's like somebody walks into your yoga studio and you give them a special deal on 10 classes, and what are they going to do in 10 classes? You know what I mean? Okay, you learn a downward dog, you do it. Okay, here's a downward dog. You maybe do a little standing pose, headstand up against the wall. What are you going to do? And then you get your 10 classes. Okay, now you keep going or you don't. I mean, what else? I mean, that's what we're doing. And it's useful for you just to get a sense of what Vedanta is, because the word is thrown around so liberally. Vedanta. Well, this is Vedanta. It's nothing other than trying to interpret awkward or problematic texts of the Upanishads. If they're not problematic, you don't have to write a sutra about it. You need to explain the sutra, explaining the Upanishads. You don't need to explain things which are not problematic. So therefore, the entire Vedanta Sutra is dealing with problematic Upanishadic statements. So right there, the very nature of it is, that's what it is. In religion, we call it exegesis. How do you interpret hermeneutics? How do you interpret a sacred text in a consistent, coherent manner? That's what Vedanta is. And if that's your cup of tea, you'll enjoy it. And but otherwise you might find it rather dry. But either way, it's good for you to know something about it. So you have a samskara, you have a sense. And the word Vedanta doesn't have this magical, mystical, Vedanta. You'll have a much more realistic understanding of what the term means. So if we can accomplish that, then that's fine. And if you want to go deeper, then these texts are up on the website. You can download them for free. I don't know about copyrights, but just don't quote me. All right. Okay, so where are we there? Okay, so we got this. Brahman is thinking, and therefore it's not the Prakriti. The ultimate cause, Prakriti is the intermediary cause for a Vedanta. They don't reject Prakriti, but they just said there has to be intelligence behind Prakriti. Prakriti can't act by itself. It's inanimate. So it's not that Vedanta rejects Prakriti Purusha model, but they have a tribe. There's Ishvara and then Prakriti and Purusha. So Ishvara triggers Prakriti into activity at the end. That's one of the arguments. See if you can follow this. If you take away Ishvara and you've got Purusha and Prakriti, now Sankhya accepts creative cycles. They didn't, there'll be a different discussion. They accept that after 14 billion years, whatever it is, all the souls go like deep sleep, but it's a cosmic deep sleep. Every night we get covered by tamas, and we call that deep sleep. So at the end of 14 billion years, the entire universe dissolves, right? The gross elements go into subtler and subtler and subtler. Imagine, I don't know, ice melting into water and then evaporating to steam. So like that, the gross part of the Prakriti dissolves, the Mahabhutas dissolve into the Tanmatras, earth, well, even in the Mahabhutas, earth dissolves into water, water dissolves into fire, fire dissolves into air, air dissolves into, at the end of creation, air dissolves, and it's the reverse of creation. Creation's the other way around. We're talking about dissolution at the end of the creative cycle. Air dissolves into ego, ego dissolves into buddhi, and then buddhi dissolves into the three gunas. At that point, there's no emergence. Nothing is emerging. We call them emergents. So there are no emergents emerging, right? So what's Prakriti doing? It's in a state of equitension, because the minute there's movement, something's going to pop out. Like if you move milk, the yogurt's going to come. Something, it's going to solidify. So no movement at all. Okay, so far so good? Right. So Vedanta's going to say, you don't have an Ishvara? Then what moves it after 14 billion years? If it's in a state of equilibrium, there's no magic. What suddenly, when the new creative cycle is about to begin, 14 billion years down the road, what agitates Rajas? What disturbs the equilibrium of the three gunas? It must be an outside force. This is how Aristotle came up with his idea of God. There's got to be somebody that's causing the heavenly spheres to revolve. And Aristotle was no fool. So what causes it? If you say there's no Ishvara, there's only Prakriti, Prakriti can't stir itself. What upsets the equilibrium? If it's been in equilibrium for 14 billion years, why would it suddenly upset itself? What is the trigger? Same against the Big Bang, my friends. If there's a singularity 8 billion years ago, and then all of a sudden, nobody knows what that is. All they know is the first second after. Not even, they talk about a millisecond. They like talk about 10 to the power 43 of 1 second after Big Bang. Then reason kicks in. Then you can start, inference kicks in. Then you can chart, you can chart things back to that first time and space kick in at that point. Before that, there is no time and space. There's no cause and effect. There is no way of understanding what that singularity was. Well, the Vedanta argument is going to say, if you have this singularity, why did it bang just then? What was the trigger? If the trigger's inside it, then it would always be banging. See? If the trigger's inside it, why did the trigger suddenly go off 1 minute and not 10 billion years later? Something must have triggered it. Things don't trigger themselves. There's some cause. If I have a gun, I have to pull my finger on the trigger. Trigger doesn't just pop by itself. So that argument, the Vedanta is directing against Sankhya, is completely and utterly directable against a non-intelligent Big Bang. That there must be an outside cause that triggers the Big Bang. And let's say you accept Big Bang. I'm not arguing about Big Bang, just saying something outside of it must have triggered it. Because if the trigger was internal, then you have to explain what made it go just at that point. And if it's internal, it would always be, anything that's internal to something would always be internal to it. It would always be triggering. Just like heat is internal to the sun, well, it's always hot. It's not that suddenly the sun became hot. So that's the argument against Sankhya. And I hope you see how that is still relevant to a physicalist metaphysics today. Okay. All right. All right, so then let's move on. And then that was verse 7. And what are we going to do? We're going to do one. I wrote it all down. So 1.1.5. Okay. So that's the argument. And let's have a look at the bliss. We've heard of Ananda, so that's Sat. And Chit. Chit is that it is Ikshater is another term for Chit. It thought, it was aware. And let's see what the bliss. Okay. So now we have, this trio of terms, Satchidananda. So we've had Sat. So Sat could refer to Prakriti or Brahman, but Chit is only Brahman. Prakriti is a Chit. And so that was the sutra we just looked at, except they didn't call it Chit, they called it Ikshater, it thought. What about this Ananda? Where does it come from? Let's have a look. Is this Shankara or Ramanuja? Oh, this is Shankara. Do we want to do Shankara? No, let's do Ramanuja. We'll do Shankara in a minute because you got we can do Shankara. Let's do Shankara 1.1.11 because then you get classic Shankara. It's Shankara with that, which I think it's good for you to read the actual verses themselves. So 1.1.11. We're just jumping around, my friends. Don't worry. It's not like we're just getting a sense, right, of the text, right? So Shankara now we were at 11. So that all-knowing Brahman alone is the first cause of the world because it is so known directly from the Vedas, okay? Remember the Vedantas, their primary source of knowledge is of the scriptures because perception cannot go there and reason cannot grasp it. That's beautiful verse in the Upanishad, much more poetic. Of course, the Vedanta Sutra is nothing poetic about it at all. They're minimalistic little statements. And look, there's only one word here, Shrutava. If you can read the Sanskrit, Shrutatvacha, because of being declared in the Vedas. All right, but anyway, let's see the argumentation. Let's see what Shankara says. All right. Let's go to the second paragraph. Therefore, it is established that the omniscient, omnipotent Brahman is the first cause and not the insentient pradhana or anything else. Right? Insentient means doesn't think, not conscious. There has to be conscious, and the scriptures say so. From Sutra 12 onwards, till practically the end of the first chapter, a new topic is taken up for discussion, whether certain terms found in the Upanishads are used in their ordinary senses or as referring to Brahman. Now here's Shankara, classic Shankara, in his own words, the two-tiered model. Again, the Upanishad speaks of two types of Brahman. The Nirguna, or Brahman without qualities or attributes, and the Saguna, or Brahman with attributes, with name and form. Nirguna means like, near, nothing, like Nirodha. Nirguna. Guna means the qualities and qualities. It is the latter, that's Brahman with attributes, right? Trees, tables, chairs, universes, planets, you, me, the latter, Saguna, write that down. Saguna Brahman. It is the latter which is within the domain of nescience and is the object of meditation. In other words, you have to meditate on it, even though it's unreal, like the snake and the rope. You meditate on it, and eventually by those meditations, its unreality will reveal itself, and all that will be left is Brahman. While the Nirguna Brahman, which is free for all imaginary limiting adjuncts. Imaginary limiting adjuncts, right? Three words absolutely capture Shankara's philosophy. Imaginary, not real, like the mirage. Limiting, Brahman is infinite, but because of Maya, it gets limited into trees and tables and universes, and an adjunct means like a form, a shape superimposed on it. So Shankara, Brahman has no limitations, no forms, but because of imaginary avidya, because of Maya, because of illusion, we think, we project these limiting. A tree is limiting, right? A tree, the matter in a tree is limited that matter into a tree. Where something is infinite and universal, it doesn't have a form, because that would be a limitation. The tree is in my garden, it's not pervading the whole universe. So any kind of an adjunct means, like a form, a superimposition. It's been added on. Shankara. So let's keep reading. Mary, I hope you're okay with this. Mary's going to write me an email and say, well, all right. So this is all for Mary Fleming up there in Vermont. Yeah. So it is the latter which is within the domain of nescience. Right. Okay. But right. Brahman, which is free from all imaginary limiting adjuncts of the other type, is the object of knowledge. Look at this. Meditation on Saguna Brahman. That means Krishna, Vishnu, right? Because they have forms and qualities. That's what the very meaning of the word Bhagavan. For Shankara, they're all Maya. They're all Maya. Okay? So meditation on Saguna Brahman cannot lead to immediate liberation. Try telling Ramanuja that. Why do you think he spends 80 pages deconstructing the heck out of Shankara? Shankara dared to tell him that his beloved Narayana is imagination. Oh, good luck. That this is why the Vedanta, the Vaishnavas, this is why they oppose Shankara so robustly, because they love God. And someone's going to come and say, your God is imaginary. It's just kind of another name and form, no different from a tree out there. It's just a superimposition on formless, qualityless. But Ramanuja wouldn't care. If Shankara just said, oh, the world is unreal, okay, Ramanuja and the Vaishnavas would say, well, we don't think it's unreal. We think it's temporary, but we think the gunas are real. They just sometimes they manifest names and forms, and sometimes they lie in a dormant state between cycles for 14 billion years. So, but it's not a big deal. You want to say it's unreal, we say it's temporary. Okay, there's a difference, but we're not going to, fine. And what about the Atman? Ramanuja would say, you know what? If you experience your own Atman, you actually will have an infinite, qualityless, formless experience, and you won't be aware of the world, and you won't be aware of any other Atmans. So pretty much, you're having exactly the experience that Shankara talks about. Ramanuja doesn't reject that. He accepts. If you are not a bhakta and you do your Patanjali and yoga, for example, you will have an infinite omnipresent, formless, qualityless, Nirguna, no quality, no problem. But you try telling us that our Bhagavan is unreal. We're gonna, 80 pages of intent. I mean, brilliance. This is not just dogma, it's not just mouthing off. Absolutely philosophically ripping Advaita Vedanta to, and have a look and see, some of it's dense, some of it's user-friendly. You can download it from the website. Have a look at his arguments, see what you think. But so, okay, on we go. So see, he says it here, meditation is basically saying, if you do bhakti, you're kind of, it's okay, it'll purify your mind. He doesn't say it's bad, but, it's not for the really enlightened. It's not for the real, the real liberated. They don't do, for them, there is no name and form. All of that dissolves. So it can't lead to immediate liberation. Look at this. It can at best lead to gradual liberation, right? Eventually you do bhakti, you worship Bhagavan. Eventually your mind becomes pure. And once it becomes pure enough, all of that dissolves, and there's no more you, there's no more Bhagavan, there's no more world, there's just all-pervading, qualityless Brahman. This is what's going to trigger the Vaishnavas. Fine, go ahead and do your Advaita. Go ahead and, if you want to think of the world as unreal, okay, when you're in the state of samadhi, near bija, yeah, you're not aware of it. Doesn't matter whether it's real or not real, doesn't really matter. And whether you're an individual or not, doesn't really matter, because when you're in that state, you're infinite, and there's no mind to even think about philosophy anyway. But don't be telling us our bhakti and our Bhagavan is unreal. Then we're gonna come after you with scripture, with logic, with deduction, with quoting the sacred text, any way you want to, any kind of epistemological engagement you want. We'll take you on, we'll quote the same scriptures you quote, we'll use inference, we'll use perception and visions of God, any type of knowledge source you want to use, we'll use it, and we will resist your, and we will, in our opinion, rebut your Advaita Vedanta. So this is where I think the polemic comes from, not so much about the other thing, but because Shankara and sometimes they would call them Mayavad, those who think that Ishvara also is Maya. Vaishnavas are not going to have that. So I just, because they have an emotional, they love God. So don't be coming telling them that their God is unreal, right? The knowledge of the Nirguna, formless Brahman, alone leads to immediate liberation. This is Shankara. Now, in many places in the Upanishads, Brahman is described apparently with qualifying adjuncts, is it apparently meaning not really, it's not real, but it appears to be, right? Look at the word, apparently. What are the qualifying adjuncts? Well, a Shiva or Vishnu, right? Qualified. He's saying it's true, the scriptures speak, they can't deny it. You can't reject the scripture. So the scripture, like Shvetashvatara, the Shiva, Krishna and the Gita, says it's true. They talk like that. But what? If Brahman is worshipped as limited by those adjuncts, it cannot lead to such liberation, because it's a limitation, because those forms are unreal. This is Shankara. But the problem, one of the many problems Shankara has is nowhere in any of the texts does it say that. This is his lens, the way that he reads the text. But the texts themselves, nowhere in the Upanishads or the Vedanta Sutra or the Gita does it ever say that all this is unreal. It says that the word it's temporary. So he has various, challenges that he has to address, but nonetheless, a brilliant, a brilliant person, and any Vedantin from that time, 8th century till today, has to engage Shankara. Can't ignore him. Such is his dominance in the field of Vedanta. So the most recent Vedanta tradition was the 19th century Swami Narayan tradition, and they're building huge temples, biggest in the world. We got one down the road here in New Jersey. Go online and type in Swami Narayan, Bridgewater. No, what is it? New Jersey. Is it not Bridgewater? Maybe it's Bridgewater. Just type in Swami Narayan Temple, and they're still building it. It's going to take them another year or two. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The Taj is like the gatehouse compared to what they're doing there. very wealthy community, a lot of the Gujaratis, very wealthy trade, merchants and successful community. So they're pouring, I mean, I don't know how much they're spending. But anyway, so they're the most recent to write a commentary. If you want to be a Vedanta, if you want to establish a lineage, then you have to have a commentary on at least the Vedanta Sutra. Maybe the Upanishads, Vedanta and Gita, you have to have a comment. Then you're accepted as a lineage, that your tradition is a bona fide lineage. So any of these, and there's probably 6 or 7 of them now, main ones. They all have to debate Shankara. So no one can ignore him, such as his presence he was the first one to write a commentary. So no one can ignore him, but all the others disagreed with him. All of them. All the other Vaishnava tradition, the ones that wrote they have schools that wrote commentaries and established lineages, would still have their centers of learning in India and their swamis and their, sacred clay and so forth. They all the other ones disagreed with this idea. Okay. So if Brahman is worship, I think you get the point. All right. So we'll go back to Ramanuja. And how much time do we have? We have, oh dear, half an hour. So what do we want to do? We do Anandamaya Vyasat. So 1.1. Is this going to be good investment of time? Let's see what he says about the self consisting of bliss. Right, so the Upanishads talk about Anandamaya. You've heard the term, right? But where does it come from? Anandamaya. It comes from the Upanishad. So here it is. Now, I don't know if this is worth our. The question is, does this Anandamaya refer to Brahman or the individual soul? And here'll be an example. Shankara will say it's Brahman, and so will Ramanuja, actually. They agree on this, except that Ramanuja would say the soul is eternal. Well, let's have a look. Do we want to invest time on this? Let's just read his answer. Let's not worry about the opponent. Answer. So we're over here on page 95. The self consisting of bliss here refers to Brahman on account of the repetition of the word bliss. I don't know why that's a very good answer, but let's keep going. The text begins, the Upanishadic text begins, right? They're quoting the passage again from the same Taittiriya Upanishad. It's a small Upanishad, but it's got just 4 or 5 verses that are central, foundational to the Vedanta Sutras. Even though it's a short, I'm just going to put a look in the fire. So this Taittiriya, it's kind of old and a bit cryptic in places, but it's foundational to Vedanta. That's where you got the definition of what Brahman is. The definition is that from which creation, etc., emerged. And that's the text which talks about Anandamaya. Its nature is Ananda. So let's see where this goes. Answer, right? So the opponent says it refers to the Ananda refers to the Atman. Okay, so the answer. The self consisting of bliss here refers to Brahman on account of the repetition of the word bliss. The text begins with, in the Taittiriya. Now, he's quoting the Taittiriya. This is an examination of bliss, says the Taittiriya. And it starts off, and then finally says, and then a little bit further on it says, from where speech, together with the mind, turns away, unable to reach it. Right? Because our senses can only see material things. We can only see objects made of Prakriti that have qualities, material qualities. So we see color, forms, shapes. And the mind can only sort of infer and, engage in critical thinking based on sense impressions. So inference is secondary to empiricism. You see things and then you make inferences. All right, I always give the example of dark matter. You haven't seen dark matter, dark energy, but you see that the universe is expanding. So then you posit there's something that's pushing it apart. And then you posit dark matter. So your inferences, the point I'm making, is dependent on sense perception. Even though inference infers things that are not perceived, those inferences are grounded in sense perception. When sense perception requires an explanation, that then inference kicks in. Okay, so that's what it means. From where speech, together the mind turns away, unable to reach it. We can't see Brahman, and we can infer that it exists. We can infer that it's intelligence, but we know nothing about its nature. So that's why the Upanishads are so beautiful. The Vedanta Sutras are really kind of dry and minimalistic. It's really intellectuality at its most compact and dense, and no poetry, just will this verse. And so it's real jnana yoga Vedanta. It's jnana, right? So, but the Upanishads are not like that. They're poetic. Isn't that beautiful? From where, let's read that. This is typical Upanishad. Very not typical Vedanta Sutra. Look at this lovely way he's phrased it. The Upanishads puts it. From where speech, together with the mind, turns away, unable to reach it. Knowing the bliss of that Brahman, he fears nothing. Right? If we know our Atman, we understand the eternal bliss. Where is there fear? That's the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Don't fear, Arjuna. Everyone is eternal. Okay. Now, Ramanuja says, so the question is, what is this bliss referring to? Brahman or the individual Atman? And Ramanuja says, this indicates, where's my cursor? There we are. This indicates supreme bliss, which cannot be surpassed by any other bliss. Like the earlier ones described in the section of the Taittiriya, such infinite bliss can only be true of the Supreme Self, which is opposed to all evil, and is of an unmixed blissful nature, and not the individual self, which enjoys only a tiny particle of bliss, and our little blisses are mixed with endless pain and grief. All right, so the opponent wants to say this bliss in the Taittiriya refers to our happiness. Sometimes we're happy anyway, right? We have our little Kodak moments. We have our cappuccino in the morning. We say, oh, I'm happy. So that kind of bliss, but the Ramanuja is saying, the text is talking about supreme and eternal bliss, not mixed. Our happiness is always, 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 always mixed. Even if you're having the best possible day of your life, pay attention, and it's mixed in with some kind of anxiety, some kind of this or some kind of that. So Ramanuja says, infinite bliss, infinite, not limited, can be true only of the Supreme Self, which is opposed to all evil, all kleshas, no karma, no gunas, and is of an unmixed blissful nature. So that's what the text says. That only applies to Brahman. Why not to the jiva? But not of the individual self. Why not? Because the individual self enjoys a particle of that bliss, a tiny little bit. We think we're happy when we have our cappuccino, but what's that compared to infinite eternal bliss? So it's a particle, a tiny little. It is, you can't deny it. We have our little moments of happiness, but particle of bliss, and that's mixed with endless pain and grief. Therefore, the self consisting of bliss, which is what the Taittiriya says, Anandamaya, that verse comes from the Taittiriya, that little phrase, Anandamaya, right? There's a guru called Anandamaya. Why is she called that? Because it's one of the great sayings of the Upanishads, right? Anandamaya, remember, wasn't it a 60s guru or 70s guru? Or maybe she's still a guru, I don't know. So Amandamaya. So that's the word. So the self consisting of bliss is the supreme self, says Ramanuja. Okay. So that's number we skip 14 because it's just dealing with some Upanishadic passages we're not interested in. what are we interested in? Let me look over here. 14. How much time do we have? Oh dear. All right. Then he goes on answer, and he goes on without that. Why don't we go to page 98, which is this. Unfortunately, we're still on the same thing. Right. So what is referred to in the mantra? The mantra is the verses of the Rig Veda. They're called mantras. And that's slightly different. When we talk about mantras nowadays, we think of Om or Om Namo Shivaya, and that's pretty much what mantra has meant to the last few centuries. But if you go back in time to the Vedic, early Rig Vedic period, BCE, the mantra refers to the hymns of the Veda, not just to a little soundbite like Om Namo Narayanaya. So mantra, the hymns of the Veda. So what is referred to in the mantra, meaning in this verse here, right? Truth, knowledge, infinity is Brahman. I think I told you this. The word Satchidananda doesn't occur in the Upanishads. It's much later. It's after Shankara. I don't think Shankara uses the term Satchidananda. The actual term, before we proceed, on page 98, are you with me? Everybody doing okay? Page.
Yes, you have to make everybody silent.
Oh, I have to do that. Is everyone doing okay? We'll just go for another 25 minutes and we'll take questions, okay? And I mean, this is what it is. It's Vedanta. I'm glad we're doing it, but it's not like the funnest thing in the universe. I mean, it's intellectually engaging. Okay, how do we do that? All right, hang on. We go over to participants and we do mute all. Mute all. Right. So let's get back and do a bit more Shastra, a bit more Svadhyaya. And what do I do here? Screen share. Okay. Back we go. Now, just so you know, Satchidananda, I put I actually asked, we have a listserv, all, academics in the field of Hinduism. And a year or two ago, I put a thing out, all the professors, I mean, if you don't get an answer from that, then you need to take birth, in the Satya Yuga, or take birth, in the next cycle, because you're not going to get it from anywhere. But anyways, I said, where's the first instance of this Satchidananda? And I thought it was Shankara. I knew it wasn't in the Upanishads. And it turned out it wasn't Shankara. It may have been, it's not clear that he uses it, but it may have been his disciples used it for sure. But you don't find it. What do you find? You have Satyam, not Sat, Satyam, which is truth. Well, you know that from the Yoga Sutras. And you don't have Chit, you have Jnana, which is fair enough, it's the same thing. And you don't have Ananda, you have Ananta, which is infinite. Do you see here? So that what you actually have is truth, knowledge, infinity is Brahman. That's the actual definition of Brahman in the same old Taittiriya. If you want to write it down, Satyam, not Sat, but Satyam, truth, Jnanam, knowledge, and Ananta with a T, which means without end, infinite. And then later on it becomes Satchidananda. Now everybody talks about Satchidananda. Nobody says Satyam, Jnanam, and Anantam, but that's actually that's the source of that little triad. However, elsewhere, Brahman is described as Anandamaya. We just read the verse, but it doesn't come as part of that trio. So it's a fourth thing, so one in the Taittiriya, it says Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. And then in elsewhere in the Taittiriya and in the Brihad and in other Upanishads, then it's Anandamaya. So they get all lumped together, and eventually that comes out as Satchidananda. And I'm not quite sure, and didn't seem like anybody else was quite sure exactly when that emerges. So this is the kind of thing that scholars do, my friends. That's what scholars do. They trace these things down. And then they wonder, why am I not liberated? Why am I still? Oh, I'm still such an idiot. I mean, it's okay. It purifies the mind, but it's not going to help you at the moment of death, my friends. Is it? You're dying, and then you say, "Hang on a minute, I'm still looking for this Sachidan underway. Wait, I haven't checked this commentary, this sub commentary. We think death's going to say, "Oh, all right, sorry, I'll come back." Don't think so. So therefore, Svajaya is essential. But for Vedanta, Svajaya is their process. The Jnana Yoga process is not the Patanjali process. Advaita Vedanta especially, Ramanuja is not really that interested in Vedanta. He's a bhakta. He really wants to, worship Narayana. And, when he's writing his own stuff, it's all bhakti. Oh, it's all bhakti and Vishnu, wonderful, and Vaikuntha and the divine realm, and the glories of God. Now he's writing on the sutras, because you know what he's really doing? He's doing exactly what the early Christian theologians were doing. The first 200 years, early Christians, right? You're in the Near East. It's all the elite are Greek educated. All of them are schooled in Aristotle and Plato. And these Christians are running around talking about Christ, laughing stuff. Bunch of misfits. Not taken serious. I mean, a few of the intellectuals become Christians. Sure, I mean, Augustine, and that's later. So the early church fathers have to give intellectual dignity to Christianity. That's what a theologian does, my friends. So therefore, they now have to, they're all schooled in Greek philosophy, all the early church fathers. So absolute, they're all the philosophers, but they're now using all that training and they construct and they engage in debates. Who is Christ? Is he man? Is he God? The whole thing, right? Up until Nicaea, but before Nicaea, there were so many different views. So the theologians have to then, there's Manichaeans, there's Arians, there's all these different views. Jesus is God. No, he's like John the Baptist. He's like a prophet. So they're then not just who is Jesus, but they have to construct a theology. There's no theology in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, just love thy neighbor and and follow me. So just like Buddha, there's no philosophy in the Buddha's teaching. It's later Buddhists that have to do that. So Ramanuja's doing that for bhakti. And in order to have intellect, so just like in order to be taken seriously in the Near East in the 2nd, 3rd century, when the Christians were, trying to establish themselves, what did you have to do? You have to know Plato and Aristotle. You had to bring in all those categories, and you had to somehow make them fit with with Yahweh of the Old Testament, the anthropomorphic God of the Old Testament. You have to somehow or other, use those the intellectual categories of your day, and you have to use them to support your scripture. That's what Ramanuja is doing. Bhakti was not taking it seriously. Advaitins are like, oh, these bhaktas, oh, it's okay. They're a little bit, they're not very enlightened. It's fine. They'll get purified, and then they'll realize there's no Bhagavan, there's no Bhakta, there's no all of these banging of bells. It's all a bit silly. But it's purifying. We don't reject it. But us, we're the sannyasis. We don't do that kind of stuff. They stick their nose up. Even today, they stick their nose up. So Ramanuja has to show he can do Vedanta. And so he does it very rigorously. So he doesn't bring in too much Narayan, you may notice. Doesn't bring in, because he's respecting what the text says. I have great respect for that. He's not taking liberties. So, but that's what he's doing. If you want to be, taken seriously, you have to write a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra right up until the 19th century. In fact, Narayan didn't even write it. I think it was, he came to my house. The first commentary was 200 years. It took 200 years for that tradition to write a commentary, and it was Bhadresh Swami. He wrote it. I was sitting right in this room. He came in 20 years ago, and he gave me a copy. I mean, I think it was a photo. He gave me a copy, and that was the first commentary for that lineage. Now that lineage is, in the world of Vedanta, has its commentary. It's going to be taken seriously, or at least it's going to be given a place at the table. So Ramanuja that's what he's doing. He's really a bhakta, but he has to play the game, like we all do when we're yogis in academia. We can't be going in with drums and chanting Hare Krishna. Well, we could, I suppose. Well, I'll do it 1 year before I retire. I'll do it, but not right now. So, so you have to use the language of philosophy. You have to talk about substance dualism. You have to talk about intelligent design. You have to use the language of your day and age. All right, enough of that. All right, back on this. So what? Now, what is referred to in the mantra cannot be the individual soul, either in its bound or its freed state, for this is impossible, inasmuch as the soul cannot possess unconditioned omniscience, as is mentioned in texts like it thought may I, don't worry about that. Right. Okay, but this is an interesting discussion, all right? Can you become completely omniscient? Patanjali says yes. Even though he says Ishvara's omniscience is unsurpassed. So even Patanjali understands there's a difference between Ishvara's omniscience and the siddhis in chapter 2. Patanjali is going to say, the qualified yogi, if your consciousness is not obstructed by the kleshas and the subtle body, what's to stop it pervading? Like light. If light's not blocked by the walls of a room or by the atmosphere, light will travel across the whole universe. That's why we talk about light coming, we talk about light traveling 14 billion years or 8 billion years. Consciousness is like that. If there's no subtle body and kleshas and karma that keep consciousness kind of trapped in this body, and we can only see according to the nature of the senses we have in this karmic body, we can only see this far. Vultures can see further, and dogs can hear more and smell more. So each body allows us the consciousness to a certain range. But if you have no senses and your subtle body is free of kleshas, it can pervade. So in that sense, you can become omniscient according to Patanjali. But Ramanuja wants to say, well, Ishvara's omniscience is not like that. Even Patanjali says Ishvara's omniscience is unsurpassed. Let's see where he goes. Look, what is unconditioned omniscience? What does it mean to have no conditions? Nothing can block your omniscience. Right now, our omniscience is blocked by our subtle bodies and by our senses. But unconditioned means no conditions are imposed on it, no blockages, right? What does that mean? He says it means the power to realize all one's purposes. You can do anything you want. Nothing can interfere with your will. That's the definition. Now, though a realized soul may be omniscient, so now he's talking like Patanjali, he's not rejecting Patanjali. Patanjali say you can be omniscient if you get free of all your kleshas. He's saying, yeah, a realized soul may be omniscient, yet it cannot be unconditioned omniscience. It cannot be without any qualifications whatsoever. Why not? For in the state of samsara, it is limited in power. How is it limited in power? Patanjali says you have any powers you want. That's what the siddhis are all about. What's the limitation on power? Here. You can't create a universe. Only Ishvara can do that. A siddha can do anything else. You can rearrange tattvas, you can make, you can rearrange the gunas and make things appear. You make an elephant appear in your room just by rearranging the gunas, but you can't create a universe. Here, Sutra 4.4.17, at the end of the Vedanta Sutra, chapter 4, section 4, the very end, denies the power of creation to the freed souls. Even if you're freed, how are you different from Ishvara? You're free, no karma, no blockages, nothing imposing on your consciousness. Then what's the difference between you and Ishvara for Vedanta? For Ramanuja anyway. Ishvara can create the universe, you cannot. Do you see how this parallels Patanjali's Ishvara's omniscience is unsurpassed? The yogi can be omniscient, but Ishvara's omniscience is unsurpassed. Why? Because Ishvara knows how to create a universe. Yogi doesn't. Yogi within the universe can fiddle around and do cool stuff and make things appear, fly in the sky, walk on water, do all that kind of cool stuff, rearrange matter in ways that look like magic. Sure. But you can't create a universe, and therefore your omniscience is limited to within the universe. Ishvara's omniscience is not limited at all, because he knows how to create a universe, and there's multiple universes. And Ishvara knows them all. We only know this one. So therefore, even the most accomplished siddha and an enlightened being, according to Ramanuja's Vedanta, remember Vishankara, all lot's just Maya anyway. In the end, it all just ends up being Brahman. But for Ramanuja, the soul is an individual. Well, and he accepts Patanjali. Oh, there's one argument against yoga. We'll go and look at it in a minute. One argument. The only objection they have against yoga. They object Sankhya. Sankhya, they don't like Sankhya because Sankhya wants to say matter is the source. No, we had a little look at that. But anyway, let's finish this up, and then I want to go and before I forget, to do the one verse against yoga. So the sutra, the 4th chapter, denies the power of creation to the freed souls. Freed means Jivan Mukta, liberated. All right, and we don't. Okay, let's go now. I want to read. Oh, we have to go to chapter 2. And that's why. Okay, one verse, and we'll end on this. The refutation of the yoga philosophy. Okay, now they spend a lot of time rejecting Sankhya. Let's be clear. They're not accepting the Prakriti and the Buddhi and the Manas and the Tanmatra and they accept all of that. They're not disagreeing with the metaphysical evolution of that. Most of you have books with little charts in your Prakriti with an arrow, and then you have Buddhi, a little arrow, a Hankara, and then you have the 10 workings, the 5 Gyanendriyas and the Karmendriyas, which, by the way, are not like eyeballs. They're Shaktis. It's not like they're so primitive that just eyeballs floating around in cosmic space. No, my friends. The 5 Gyanendriyas, the 5 Karmendriyas are the Shaktis. Shankara calls them pranas. You can call them pranas. They're 10 pranas. I know some places they talk about 5, but you could also think about 10. Remember, everyone's organizing their stuff differently. So those are pranas. That's the pranas. In case you wonder what kind of a primitive, primordial, medieval system is this, that you have Buddhi, you have Prakriti. You know what I'm talking about, right? The charts. Yes, Janet, you've seen them. Yeah, everybody's seen them, right? Have you ever thought, what the heck are these Indriyas? What you get Prakriti, and then you get Buddhi, and then you get Ahankara, and then what, eyeballs start popping out of the cosmos? And you get 5, limbs, 5 limbs, you get arms floating about, no, those are made of the Mahabhutas, the gross elements. So those 10 things, right, there's mind, the Gyanendriyas, and the Karmendriyas, they're Shaktis. So they're basically pranas. Notice that prana's not on that list. It's not really air, it is air. Nobody quite knows what prana is, by the way. I've got a whole book, have different schools talking about what prana is. I think of prana as air pervaded by Chaitanya. That's, I find, the most, that's the air which carries consciousness around the body. We're going all over the place. Sorry, I'm jumping a bit. But this is interesting, isn't it? Surely you've thought about this. What are those 10 things? All right, let's get back now. So Vedanta doesn't disagree with any of that, accepts the whole thing. The only disagreement is Purusha Prakriti, yes. But there's Brahman, which is the cause of both of them. And Brahman is intelligent. Unintelligent Prakriti cannot create the world. It has no intelligence. There's no guidance. How is it going to do it? It's like, okay, so that's the disagreement. Now, with yoga, one disagreement. They accept the 8 limbs and everything. Siddha, chapter 3, all the siddhis, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the vrittis, they might have slightly different ways of framing things. No problem with any of it. One thing, which, by the way, has got nothing to do with Patanjali. So whatever they're talking about when they're talking about yoga, it's not the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, it's some other yoga tradition. Why do I say that? Let's look at it. Refutation of the yoga philosophy. We're in chapter 2. A fresh objection. All right, so they've just been rejecting Sankhya because Sankhya does not accept Ishvara. That's all. Only objection. Now the objector says, a fresh objection is raised. Granting, said the objector, that the Sankhya Smriti is not authoritative. They don't quote scripture. They don't base their metaphysics and ontology on the Upanishad. So it's not authoritative. They're not accepting the ultimate authority of the sacred texts. They take shelter in inference and reason, right? Which is kind of what the post-Enlightenment initiates in Europe. So Sankhya's like that. They're proto-rationalists, right? So they're not authoritative, right? But they don't just say that, by the way, they don't just say, oh, you don't quote the scriptures, we reject you. No, no. They then use logic to show how Sankhya is incorrect. And they use logic to say, no, there has to be intelligence. And we've touched upon that. There has to be intelligence to cause the gunas to evolve into all of that 25 categories that we see in our charts. Now, what about yoga? So the opponent says the yoga smriti at least is authoritative. Why? Because it recognizes an Ishvara. No, look at this, who directs the pradhana, and also Ishvara in Patanjali doesn't direct the pradhana. There's no talk of creation in Patanjali. Ishvara is the Purusha Vishesha, special soul. Why is he special? Klesha karma samayana vichinnaha, never affected by the kleshas, right? Tasya sarvagnya nirati shayam, he's omniscient, right? Tasya guru purvesham, he's the guru, right? And tasya vachika pranavaha, nothing about creation. So I don't know who Ramanuja is talking about, but there were different schools of yoga. We know Patanjali Yoga Sutras. At a certain point, Patanjali becomes the go-to text, just like there's different schools of Vedanta. So there seems to have been, and then we know for sure there was, because Gita is Sankhya with Ishvara, who is the creator. Gita is a Sankhya text. The whole of chapter 14, Sankhya. Whole of chapter 17, Sankhya. Half of chapter 18, Sankhya. So therefore, there were theistic Sankhya traditions, all of the Puranas, theistic Sankhya. But there was at least one tradition, and it must have been fairly prominent because, you know, they refer to it. There was one non-Ishvara Sankhya tradition, and that's the one we've just been discussing. Let's say pradhana by itself, it makes the universe, you don't need intelligence. So now, there must have been yoga traditions where Ishvara is not just Om, not just the guru of the ancients, not just a special Purusha, but the creator. Are you clear? Patanjali doesn't mention anything about creation in the Yoga Sutras. So I don't know which yoga tradition, it doesn't matter, but let's see what the objection is. So he's saying at least yoga accepts Ishvara, who directs the pradhana, and also because it's propounded by Brahma or Hiranyagarbha, who is the promulgator of the Vedas. Okay. Notice Patanjali says Atta Yoga Anushasanam. Anushasanam, yes, first sutra. Anu means continuing. Who continuing from what? Well, the commentators to the Yoga Sutra and the larger Indian tradition says the first yogi is Brahma, the secondary creator. All right? And we'll read the story of Brahma. We actually did it in a previous workshop. Hang in there, my friends. We don't have much longer. Just stick with this one thing now. So Ramanuja is saying, okay, the opponent says, well, Sankhya may not be authorized because it doesn't accept Brahman, but yoga is okay. Yoga accepts Ishvara, and yoga was spoken by Brahma, who in Brahma is the one who delivers the Vedas. So if Brahma delivers the Vedas, and he was the first yogi, then yoga must be authorized. That's the Purva-paksha. There cannot be any sage superior or equal to Vyas, right? Vyas is, whose smriti could be, right? There's no one more. Okay, let's just jump to the argument. So what's the argument? Therefore, says the opponent, we have to interpret the Vedanta texts. He accepts, let's do we're going to work with the Vedanta. Yes, let's work with them. Let's interpret them. But we have to interpret them according to the smriti. Smriti means the yoga, not the Vedas or the Upanishads, other texts like the Puranas. They're the smriti. Okay, the Upanishads are shruti, that which was heard. All the other texts like the Gita and the Puranas and all of that, Ganesh, Shiva, all of that, none of that's in the Upanishad. It comes in the smriti, the two epics, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, smriti. The Shruti is only the Vedas and Upanishads and a couple of other things. So And what does he want to say? The opponent wants to say that Ishvara, here's the argument. Don't worry about any of that. What's the argument that Vedanta is going to object to? That Ishvara is the efficient cause and the pradhana, the material cause. Okay, do you see the move that's been made? Sankhya, no Ishvara at all. Prakriti is the material cause, everything comes from Prakriti. Now says the opponent, okay, so you've rejected that, fair enough. But here we have another little objection. Yoga does have an Ishvara, but yoga's Ishvara is not the material cause, but the efficient cause. Are we clear about the difference? Okay, let's go back to our mud. Got a lump of clay, and you make your pot. That's the example that they always give in Indian philosophy. Or you could go gold, lump of gold, you make a nice gold ring. All right. So the material cause is the gold, because that's the matter from which the ring is made. The ring is gold. So the matter, the substance that the ring is made from comes from the lump of gold. So that lump of gold is the material cause of the ring. So far, so good. Do we see that much? The clay is the material cause of the clay pot. Clay pot is made of what? Clay. So the cause of it, the material cause, the matter from which the pot comes, is a lump of clay. Yes, that's the material cause. Now, Vedanta's going to say, yeah, but it's not like the pot just jumps out by itself. It may be the case that clay is the material cause, but you need another cause, an efficient cause. For example, you need a potter, you need a turning wheel, you need to stick a stick in it so that it goes round and makes the hole. These are efficient causes and not the material causes. The material cause is clay. The stick isn't a material cause. The potter isn't a material cause. The spinning pottery wheel is not the material cause, but they're efficient causes. They contribute to the emergence of the pot efficiently. So there's a difference between a material cause and an efficient cause. So the objector says, and Vedanta says, Brahman is both the material and the efficient. And so the opponent says, okay, well, yoga must be okay. You've just rejected Sankhya, because Sankhya doesn't accept any Ishvara at all. Remember, Ishvara and Brahman is the same thing for Ramanuja. So you rejected Sankhya, but you can't. But you have to accept yoga. Yoga is has an Ishvara, and they say Ishvara is the efficient cause, right? That's the opposing point of view, right? This view is refuted by this sutra. Even Hiranyagarbha, I don't skip all that. So he's saying even Brahma is an embodied being and as such liable to error. The opponent says Brahma is the first, is the creator, not like Vishnu is, but he's the engineer. He must know everything. So he's the one who was the first yogi. So Ramanuja says, well, even Hiranyagarbha is another name for Brahma. Even Brahma is an embodied being and liable to error. He's still in samsara. He's still trapped by karma. That's why he might have the best birth in the universe. He might be the most powerful celestial, but the fact he took birth means he's embodied and he's trapped in a body mind. Might be much better than ours, but he's still liable to error. So that's the first thing. That's not his main argument, but he starts off like that because the opponent introduced Brahma. So he goes, this smriti, meaning the yoga shastra, it may not be Patanjali's, but whatever he has in mind, this because Patanjali does not speak of Ishvara as efficient cause. This smriti also, like the Sankhya smriti, is based on error. Vedanta will not accept anything that does not accept the Upanishads. Anything that goes, for them, the Upanishads are the highest epistemological source, the highest source of knowledge. It's not your eyesight, it's not your senses, they're imperfect. It's not reason, that's imperfect. It's only the scripture. The scripture is eternal, pure, and infallible. Obviously, nowadays we have a problem with that, but that's the Vedanta position. All right. Why? Now, Let's keep going. Well, actually, it gets complicated. If Ishvara is merely the efficient cause, then by the knowledge of one, everything will not be known. Right. The Upanishads say, if you know that Brahman, you know everything. Yes, that's the background. Yes, Tim? The knowledge of one, everything is known. However, if you know the efficient cause, that doesn't mean you know the material cause. I might walk into the potter's shed and I see the potter's wheel, I see the potter, I see the stick, but I don't know what the pot's made of. I haven't seen the clay. So just because you know the efficient cause doesn't mean you'll know the material cause. And Ramanuja says, but the scriptures say, if you know the one, you know everything. Therefore, that Brahman must be both material and efficient. My friends, I'm sorry if this is really dry. We're doing the best we can, but where's Vedanta Sutra? Now you know why I just want to read Bhagavatam. All right, well, that's the argument. Let's see if he says anything else. So, for the knowledge of the pradhana, if you know Prakriti, will not give us knowledge of the sentient souls. By knowing Prakriti, you don't know the Atman, nor Ishvara, nor can the knowledge of Ishvara. Anyway, that's his argument. So we have to conclude, how does he conclude? That Brahman alone is both the efficient and material cause of the world, and its knowledge will result in the knowledge of everything. If you separate efficient and material cause, but by knowing one, you won't know the other necessarily. But the scriptures say, if you know Brahman, you know everything. So then both efficient and material cause must be Brahman. That's the argument. I don't know if you think it's a good argument, but look how he ends up. Hang on, let's just finish up. Therefore, he says, only those smritis, meaning, the smritis are all the texts other than the Vedas and Upanishad, all the other texts. So only those are authoritative. Which ones do we accept as Vedanta? Which other texts? Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Puranas, the Gita, everything, even the sutras. The sutras are not, they're all smriti, right? The Vedic, the Shruti, the real sacred texts are just the four Vedas and the Upanishads and a couple of other things, right? So which smritis do we accept then? Only those smritis are authoritative which teach Brahman as the cause of the world. If they teach that, we'll accept them. Remember, right at the very beginning of Vedanta, Tattva Brahma Jignasu. Now we're going to inquire into Brahman. Second sutra. What is Brahman? Janmadhyasya yataha. That from which creation emerges. That is Vedanta. That is the foundation stone, my friends. That is its very identity. That's why is it a distinct school? What makes it distinctive from the other schools? Right there. That they're interested in Brahman, and Brahman is the cause of everything. And so therefore, anything which contradicts that, they'll accept everything as long as it accepts that. If it doesn't, then they don't recognize it. So, but then he goes on to say very nicely, it may be said that the Yoga Smriti teaches many things which are taught by the Vedas. It's true. And to that extent only is it acceptable, and its other teachings have to be rejected. Yes, he says it's true. Yoga Sutras have lots of good stuff. But, Chittavritti Nirodha and the Kleshas, we accept all of that. No problem. We accept everything as long as it doesn't contradict our foundational truth. And our foundational truth is that Brahman is the efficient and material, it's the cause of everything. We accept everything about yoga, and they've got it half right. They're better than Sankhya. At least they accept in Ishvara. They got that right. And they understand there must be intelligence. They got that right. But they think of Ishvara as only efficient, meaning that matter is something distinct from Ishvara. And Ishvara acts on matter and creates. But that matter is distinct from Ishvara. That bit they got wrong from the point of view of Vedanta. Because Brahman is the source, the material source, and the efficient source. Did some of that make sense, my friends? So we'll take questions then. And this is Vedanta. you know. You're not going to see the Vedantings, you know, hanging out on a Saturday night in a disco. They are very intense. The process of jnana yoga is you immerse. What is jnana yoga? At least what is Dvaita? There's different kinds of jnana, but you immerse your mind in the teachings of the Vedanta and the Upanishads, and even though it's all part of the illusion, you have to use the illusion to get out of the illusion. Does that make sense? So therefore, even though the Vedas themselves are part of the world of superimposition, they're part of the unreal. They're also limiting adjuncts, to use that same language. But if you immerse your mind in those teachings, immerse it. So it's not chitta vritti nirodha. They don't do chitta vritti nirodha. They're vritti, but their vrittis are very, very focused and very, very much sort of absorbed in these teachings. And by studying, then at a certain point you create what they call a brahmakara. You create a special type of vritti, which is the Brahma vritti. Because for them, the Upanishads and the Vedanta is just nothing other than Brahman. Every single passage of Vedanta is trying to establish Brahman, is trying to establish Sutra number 2. That Brahman is the cause of the world. So the other 550 sutras are all dealing with anything that might interfere with that, any awkward passages in the Upanishads, right? But the whole raison d'etre is to establish Brahman. And therefore, by engaging all of this sort of, study, it's called, Shravana and Manana, reflecting on it, and you reflect on it, and you study it, and you reflect on it. That's their process. Very, very study intensive. And then eventually you create, right? Because whatever you absorb in your mind sort of becomes that, right? Don't they say that the wasp, no, the yogis say that the fly caught in the spider web of the spider, and the spider, and it's stuck there, and the spider's not hungry, so he's just sort of waiting a bit, and the terrified fly is so utterly absorbed in the spider that's imminently going to devour it that it when it dies, it becomes a spider, because it becomes that. So tattvamasi, the great teachings. So therefore, if you utterly absorb your mind in the Upanishads, which are Brahman, and the Vedanta, which are Brahman, they're just signifiers. They're just kind of ways for the mind to the mind which can't grasp it. Remember, it can't grasp it. It can't go there, but it can absorb itself in the teachings about it. Even though the mind can't grasp it directly, it can grasp it in the form of these teachings. And once it's become 100%, and the same thing, free of the kleshas, free of desire, all the regular yoga stuff, everybody accepts that, bhakti, everybody. But by total immersion, at a certain point, that brahmakara, the Brahma vritti, it's not actual Brahman, but it's a vritti about Brahman, fortified and bolstered, and by constant study about Brahman, at a certain point, there's this eureka moment. You can't describe it. And all of a sudden, the theoretical dissolves and the actual manifests. The theoretical absorption of the material mind in Brahman, all of a sudden there's a bada boom moment, this kind of eureka moment, and then that mind dissolves, and then there's no one left to think. There's just an experience of pure infinite bliss. This is Shankara. Ramanuja doesn't want that. He wants to have an eternal individual relationship with Bhagavan. We're talking Advaita Vedanta now. So Shravana, Manana, Nitidhyasana. So that's the process. So therefore, like I said, the reason I said all of that is, so it's very intense in that sort of way. It's intense kind of engaging the mind in obscure passages, but it has when I first read it, I was really disappointed because it was just all over the place. And what's the use of a text if one scholar can come and read the same text and say the world is unreal, the Atmas are unreal, and Bhagavan is unreal, and there's only Brahman, and he's reading that in the Upanishads, and then another 200 years later, Ramanuja comes along and reading exactly the same verses, same Upanishad, and he's coming out, well, no, Brahman is Narayana, the world is real. And I was like, what the heck? What kind of use is the text like that? But now I've actually, it's just kind of cool. It's just kind of cool to be in the company of these great minds. I say one more thing and I'll stop. It's not that the Upanishads are Dvaita or Advaita or Vishishtadvaita. It's not that the Atman is making this choice, because Atman is pure consciousness. We have a mind. If you study Advaita Vedanta for 40 years, 20 years, 30 years, all the samskaras, Advaita, Shankara, Advaita, your consciousness then is flowing through that mind with those samskaras and reading the text, and you're going to see Advaita. You're going to see it all over it, because your samskaras are delimiting or forming the your perception. So you will read Advaita Vedanta and it'll be obvious to you that Advaita Vedanta is what's imparted in the text. If you're a Vishishta Dvaitin or a Dvaita dualist, 40 years, Dvaita, not Advaita, but Vishishta, and all the samskara, Vishishta, God, world, all real. And then your consciousness flows through those samskaras, that they are going to now direct what you perceive in the text. And you're going to see it's obvious that there is a God. It's obvious the world is real. It's obvious the soul is eternal. So don't think that the Upanishads are one or the other. And don't think that the Atman is making the choice. It's the mind. The mind is then determining how you use your mind. And we already have a mind, so we're probably already partial from past lives or who knows when. We're already partial to a particular reading. Mary Ellen.
Sorry. Okay. So I'm a little confused about the way you characterized Samkhya from the way I learned it way back. So maybe because I learned theistic Samkhya, because we were studying the Ishvara Krishna, because I thought that the Purusha was the first evolute, and that the reason that Shankara didn't like Samkhya was because in Samkhya, the way we learned it, there was the Purusha, there was the unmanifest, and then there was the Prakriti, and that's what he didn't like, that the unmanifest was separated from the Purusha. And I actually just pulled out an old notebook, and it's from that time. And in the notebook, I've got written down that in the Karka 17 in the Samkhya, that the Purusha is established through inference, and that there is the sense that, the Purusha is responsible for manifestation. But I guess this is theistic Samkhya.
The Ishvara Krishna.
That ultimately that it's because of Purusha that it's like it's inferred. We have to have Purusha in order to have the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. The Ishvara Krishna's Sankhya Karikas are the oldest. The Sankhya goes back, probably it's the oldest school, but we don't have any of the oldest stuff. We have it as it pervades the various traditions. So the text that has come to be like the placeholder, the equivalent to Patanjali, is the Sankhya Karika. There's no mention of Ishvara there. There's no mention of Brahman. In the Sankhya Karika, there's Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is not the first. Purusha is eternal. They're both eternal. It's not that Purusha is a manifestation of anything. It's a dualistic system, Purusha and Prakriti. The unmanifest is Prakriti when it's latent.
Right.
It's the unmanifest, meaning just the three gunas. There's nothing. Then the manifest is when Prakriti then manifests its latent potentials. So there's no, in Ishvara Krishna, there's no Ishvara that's guiding that, either as a material cause or as an efficient cause. So that's what Ramanuja and Vedanta is debating. So Sankhya,
aren't they saying so isn't there, though, there's no inference that All
Yeah,
this is for the sake of Purusha.
all inference. Sankhya does not quote a single Upanishad.
Right, but isn't that inference there? Because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, so they infer that there is a Prakriti. In fact, Prakriti is called Pradhana. It's even called the inferred one, the Anumanita. So Prakriti is inferred and Purusha is inferred. It's all, therefore it's actually proto-rationalism. It's all inferred. Vedanta says you can't infer the ultimate cause. Only revelation can give it to you, and then they have their Brahman. But in terms of Sankhya, they're both inferred, yes, but they're completely distinct entities, and they're inferred, and they give you, and you read the Sankhya Karikas, and it shows you why they're inferred. Why is there a Purusha? Why is there Prakriti? And it's so Shankara's going to object to it because, first of all, he doesn't believe in Prakriti and Purusha anyway. Prakriti is a superimposed mirage, and there's no individual Purusha. There's only, in Sankhya, there's an infinity of individualized Purusha. So Shankara doesn't accept that. He accepts one Purusha, when he doesn't use the term, he calls it Brahman. So there are two objections that Shankara has against Sankhya. One is the plurality of Purushas. Number two is that Prakriti is not even real anyway, but the real objection is really it's all Brahman.
Okay, thank you.
Eleonora?
You said Patanjali doesn't mention Brahman. He says Ishvara. So is he implying that he takes Ishvara as the efficient cause?
Well, Patanjali doesn't talk about creation at all.
Okay.
The only function Ishvara has in Patanjali is that he manifests as Om and Tajapa Tadartha Bhavanam, that you do japa and you chitta vritti nirodha your mind on Om.
That's it.
That's it. Because
Okay.
what's Patanjali's whole project? Chitta vritti nirodha.
All right. Okay.
So that he's not going to talk about creation. It's not that he may or may not accept it. He's just not talking about it. His project, he tells us at the beginning, Atta Yoga Anushasana. Atta, what are we going to do now? Yoga Anushasana. We're going to continue yoga. Fine. What is this yoga? Chitta vritti nirodha. He tells us that right there. So everything in Patanjali circles around that contract, that project. It's about nirodha. So then how do you nirodha? Well, you have to have an alambana, you have to have a support for the mind. So that's what Ishvara comes in as a vachaka, and then you do japa. And then he gives a list of other things. He has no other interest in Ishvara. Now, he may have been a Vaishnava. He must have been either a Vaishnava or a Shaiva. I've written an academic paper on this. Because if you believed in Ishvara, 2,000 years ago, you necessarily were a Shaiva or a Vaishnava or a Krishnite. There wasn't, that's what Ishvara, that's what it meant to believe in Ishvara. But he's not getting into that. It's not, he's not giving us irrelevant information. There's only 1,200 words. So he's only giving us the material that he feels is relevant to his project, which is to teach us Chitta Vritti Nirodha.
Good. Okay, thank you. Then
You're welcome.
I would like to listen to your thoughts about why is Advaita Vedanta so popular in the West or between Westerners?
Well, it became popular with Swami Vivekananda, he wasn't the first to come to the West, but he was the first to come to the West and make a major splash the very end of the 1800s. And he snuck onto a boat, and he was an unknown Swami, and he just showed up at the Chicago, conference, World Conference of Religion. And it was really bringing together the Christian sects. They called it a world conference. Now they had a few token non-Christians, like one Jain, and there was a Ramakrishna. There was the Brahma Samaj. So they had a few token, Confucian person, a dozen, and there were hundreds of Christians denominations representatives. I think the idea was to show that Christianity was superior, right? But they wanted to call it world, so they had a couple of token And anyway, he wasn't even invited, but some or other he showed up, and they were probably quite happy. He was charismatic, and he had a turban. And so they gave him they allowed him to speak, and he came up and he just wowed. He said, "Brothers and sisters of America," and everybody clapped, and they just loved him. And then they took him, and then after the conference, he was headlines of the newspapers. He was feted by the high society, and he was very successful. So then when he goes back to India, that's huge. There still is a colonial power, right? They've been under colonial power under the British, and before that the Mughals, and now there's one of theirs bringing back Western disciples that's sitting at his feet. This was huge. So Vivekananda was a big part of the story, number one. And number two, the missionaries would be very much critiquing, idol worship, the Old Testament, thou shalt not worship the graven image, thou shalt have no other gods before me. These are the 10 Commandments, right? So therefore, there was no way missionaries or the colonial power were going to take the deities seriously, the forms of Ishvara, Bhagavan. No way they were going to have absolutely no kind of, they didn't think that had any intellectual value whatsoever. In fact, the missionaries thought that, the poor Indians are going to hell, that Satan has come in the form of the idols and taken them all to hell. So the Advaita Vedanta has the advantage, because Ramanuja is going to say, God is Narayan. That's your God the Father. There's no way. Try saying that to a Christian 100 years ago. So Advaita Vedanta has the advantage of saying, well, all of this is Maya. It's all Maya. Really, there is just all-pervading Brahman. So that's a much more palatable, a much more digestible, even though the Christians were not particularly happy, right? Because they want God the Father. They want to have a personal being as God. But still, this idea of Brahman being beyond name and form was much easier for them to have a conversation with than somebody saying God has 4 arms, or he plays a flute and sleeps with the wives of other, the gopis. So that's how it starts. And I think, so then, Advaita Vedanta becomes considered more intellectually respectable, and these other traditions are just primitive. They're polytheistic. They're, very primitive, really, to think that God has 4 arms. So then that carries over into the counterculture, and many of the gurus that came were Advaita. So Shivananda's disciples, Vishnu Devananda, Satchidananda, many of them were Advaita flavored. And Guruji Iyengar, even though he's Ramanuja, he never shared that. There were only a couple of his disciples, he would tell them, but there were only a couple of his disciples that actually went beyond asana and started exploring his Vedanta background. And one of them, was the French guy in Paris. He became, he went all the way into the Vaishnavism. But anyway, so those are various reasons. And I think still today, many Westerners and perhaps some of us here, they have a problem, they don't know what to do with 4 arms, are they mythological? Are they symbolic? We apply our Western models to try, let's say we don't want to be like the Christians and say, oh, you're going to hell. We want to be politically correct. We want to be accepting and embracing and lovey-dovey. So we're going to say, oh, they're metaphors, they're symbols. Well, that's not what the tradition says. The tradition says that's God the Father. So therefore, we still try to project our Western, maybe in a more nicer, kinder, politically correct sort of way. We say, oh, they're metaphors of God's, 4 arms represents power. We have 2 arms and God is omnipotent. So the extra 2 are just to signify, omnipotence. So we apply these metaphoric kind of, just like the Christians did to the God of the Old Testament, who walks around the Garden of Eden, and is anthropomorphic. And 200 years later, the Christians started saying, no, that's just metaphor. God, so the same thing happened in the West. But anyway, so those are some reasons, Eleonora.
All right. So it's not, the difficulty is not explaining the duality of Maya. That is not difficult.
Well, not everybody accepts Shankara. at all. I mean, clearly it's a big, Maya is a big problem philosophically. I mean, philosophers are going to, even Western philosophers are going to have a problem with the same kinds of problems that the Ramanuja had with Shankaras. But it's easier, at least you can have an intellectual conversation from their point of view with Advaita Vedanta. But if someone is saying God the Father has 4 arms, most philosophers are not even going to want to continue that conversation. They're going to say, you know what, why don't we just have a little walk and have a cup of tea? And whatever. Ian.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So to Shankara, is the Atman form or formless?
Formless. There isn't an Atman. There's only Brahman. I mean, first of all, even in the conventional world of Maya, he wouldn't say form. He would say it's delimited by Maya.
Right.
But ultimately, it has no delimitation. It has no form. It has nothing individualizing it. There is a word in Sanskrit, a vishesha. If you wanted to translate that in English, you'd have to make up a word, an individuator, something which makes one thing individual. Otherwise, it would just melt and merge into the next door neighbor. Right. So therefore, the Atman has an individuator. Otherwise, you're over there and I'm over here. It's not that we're merged. So you must have some property that makes you an individual, not your body, mind, but the consciousness you. And my consciousness, me, must have a property that makes me think I'm individual. That's an individuator, which I know we don't say in English, a vishesha. So Shankara would accept that only in the world conventional reality. The illusory reality, it appears there are individuators. It appears that we're delimited. That's what an adjunct is. Remember that word adjunct? And so the Atman has adjuncts superimposed on it, but ultimately there's only infinite, all-pervading, non-differentiated, no delimitators, no distinguishers, no forms, no names, only one infinite entity called Brahman, the nature of which is Sat, it is eternal, Chit, it is conscious, and Ananda, it's fully blissful.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So Shankara feels that our individuality is Maya, is just illusion. It's not real.
Yes. Exactly that.
Okay. And then my other question, I suppose, I know when it comes to like having a personal relationship or an impersonal relationship, if you have an impersonal relationship with Brahman, it's more confusing, right? And you're sort of attaching more to different forms of illusion as opposed to one entity, one form, like a personal relationship, which obviously, like for us, like Krishna would still be Maya, would still be an illusion.
For Shankara.
For Shankara, correct.
For Ramanuja, yes. For Shankara, Krishna is an illusion. Look, the only kinds of relationships are personal. How can you have an impersonal relationship? In other words, a relationship is personal between one entity and another entity.
Right.
But for Shankara, that's only conventional. He accepts that, bhakti, but only for, practice, for when you're, still on the road. When, he'll in the Gita, he talks about Krishna and bhakti. He has to, because the Gita is all about that. But it's all conventional, right? So ultimately, it all dissolves. And it's not like you have an impersonal relationship, but rather you're impersonal. Non-personal mean no names, no form, no qualities, no, right? When illusion is dispelled, there's no more relationships, because relationships require two things. All dualities dissolve. The Atman is Brahman, always was. And now the Atman experiences its non-personal, infinite, eternal nature. No more relationships because there's no dualities. Relationship requires two.
Right. And we're all illusions, so we couldn't have a relationship with
Well,
Brahman.
only in illusion we can. And he'll accept that it's good for you. He'll say, if you do bhakti, it's good in this sense that it will purify your mind.
Right.
He'll even accept Vedic ritualism. Like you remember that discussion, it's kind of lower. But he'll say, yeah, it's purifying. But once your mind is sufficiently pure, then you'll realize that everything is Brahman and there's no more you and Ishvara and bhakti and ringing of bells. It all dissolves.
And that's kind of where I've been connecting recently, that I feel like as much as I'm going through a lot of the philosophies and stuff, that it's still all just some sort of man-made concept, that there is something way bigger and beyond that none of us could even comprehend or understand.
Yes,
so
but
I think I'd like to go deeper into Shankara's philosophy for sure, because it seems like there's one or the other, and I can see that there's in between, right? Because I understand bhakti and service and my devotion to more like Krishna helps me keep my mind right, to be love and devotion to other people, to see love and acceptance from this world, but to feel like maybe there's something bigger and beyond, I'm not too sure. So
But just be aware of one thing, Ian. Everything is a concept. At this point,
right.
Advaita Vedanta is a concept, Vishishta Advaita is a concept, God is a concept, formlessness is a concept. These are all concepts. So we only have this mind as our tool.
Correct.
Whether we want to Nirodha it, whether we want to absorb it in Jnana Yoga, whether we want to absorb it in Bhakti, our mind is our tool. Yep. And so therefore, so let's be clear that so everything until we have those experiences are all mental construct, meaning they're all samskaras in the mind.
Right.
Now, and if I may add one other thing, I don't see it as either that one is right and one is wrong.
Right.
I think they are both eternal, real, ultimate truths. You can follow Advaita and attain really an experience of your Atman, call that one with Brahman. You can have that and experience a state of eternal, infinite bliss for all eternity. That does not, and somebody else can prefer to maintain the individuality and have an eternal relationship with God. And it's not like one excludes the other, or one is right and one is the other. They are both options, eternal options forevermore. So take your pick.
Beautiful.
You want to have impersonal, non-personal, non-individualized, no name, no form, passive, static, no action, no activity, and it's just an infinite state of consciousness, which includes blissfulness. You can have that. Mm-hmm. If, on the other hand, you want to have an eternal, if you want love as opposed to bliss, if you want to have a loving relationship eternally with a wondrous, supreme, eternal God, you can have that. So therefore, it's not that one is right, one is wrong. There are options, and I believe the ultimate goal itself is variegated. We have this idea that the ultimate truth must be one size fits all. No, why? Let the ultimate truth itself be eternally variegated. Because Buddhists are going to talk about another thing altogether. Their nirvana is going to be a whole other state of being. So either we say one is right, one is wrong, because clearly they don't, they're not saying the same thing. So either you say one is right, one is wrong, or you say they're all mental constructs and there's nothing, they're just materialism, they're all mental, or you say, let them all be real, true, eternal, liberated, transcendent states. And if that's the fact, then you choose your path, and your path will take you exactly where it says it's going to take you. Decide which one you want, Ian.
Perfect. Thank you. That was beautiful. Beautiful.
Snehi. The good thing about Bhakti is, though, Bhakti, it's kind of safe because Advaita Vedanta will still accept it. It will just say naturally, it will dissolve on its own. And whereas the Bhaktas, the Ramanuja say, no, it's eternal. But either way, it's still, well, they all have value. They all, but it's not, don't worry about doing bhakti, because either it's going to take you to a left or a right, but it's definitely, everybody agrees it's taking you to a place beyond samsara and beyond birth and death.
Agreed.
Snehi,
Namaste.
namaste.
So I was curious in making the distinction in mind between theistic Sankhya and non-theistic Sankhya. So non-theistic Sankhya, we say, you have Prakriti and Purusha, right? Where Purusha is thought of as the intelligent principle.
Yeah.
And
Go on.
And Prakriti, we say, is the matter, the primal matter from which the universe unfolds. And then when we speak of theistic Sankhya, we also have Prakriti, but then do we call it Purusha or Ishvara? And is that also an intelligent principle, or is it referred to as the efficient cause?
Well, they do use the term intelligent principle, and often it's jnana. But in Sankhya, the actual intelligence itself is buddhi, is part of Prakriti. So Purusha is actually just consciousness. So, I think it's confusing to call Purusha the I know they do that, but I would just call it the activating principle. But really what it is, the quality of Purusha, the property is consciousness itself. There's no intellectual deliberation in the sense of, shall I make a left or a right, until it connects with a subtle body, until it has its prakritic buddhi and manas, and then it actually starts actually intellectualizing. In its own state, there's no intellectual activity. That in the state of Purusha is just pure infinite consciousness, just like Advaita Vedanta says. They describe liberation identically, but Sankhya would say there's infinity of Purushas, they don't merge together. But if you read the descriptions of the actual state, they're identical, because they both agree it's infinite, it's eternal, there's no mind to think I am me and that's an other, there's none of that. So right now, Purusha in Sankhya, the non-theistic Sankhya, it's not Ishvara, but they would say, the Vedanta says, well, how does the Prakriti start to activate? And Sankhya would say, well, by proximity to Purusha. That proximity is like a magnet in the proximity of iron filings. Well, it's just the nature of the magnet to make the filings move. You don't need a god. So because of proximity, and then the proximity of Purusha, even though Purusha is, has no intelligence, it's consciousness, but has no active intelligence, not thinking, let me create, it's not, because it doesn't have a buddhi yet. So the proximity causes the stirring of Prakriti. Now, Vedanta's objection to that is, well, if they were always proximate, they would always be creation. There would never be a dissolution. And Sankhya does accept cyclicality. So if it's the nature of the magnet to always, when it's near filings, it will always agitate the filings. Well, Purusha is always near Prakriti. So and number one, it would always be agitating Prakriti. Number two, there'd be no liberation, because it would always be proximate to Prakriti, because Prakriti is infinite and Purusha is infinite. So one infinite thing is infinitely abiding or existing next to another infinite thing. It would never be liberated. So these are the very arguments that Vedanta would bring forward. But so therefore, Vedanta has an Ishvara that's separate from the Purusha. You can call him a Param Purusha or Paramatman, but it's a separate entity altogether. So
that is the response of the theistic Sankhya to have Ishvara to do that job of directing Prakriti.
Yes. Sorry.
What you were saying, bringing starting off the cycle of creation and also stopping the cycle of creation.
Exactly that, yes.
And that Ishvara is also we also would think of it as just consciousness?
Well, he's a conscious being, yes, but that Ishvara thinks, and but that, so then we don't get any information from Sankhya about the nature of that Ishvara.
Okay.
That's where Purana kicks. That's when we bring in the Puranas. and they give us information about Vishnu and Shiva and Krishna. Because so that's, but no, Patanjali doesn't say anything. I mean, if Ishvara is a Purusha, and if he's a guru of the ancients and he's omniscient and never affected by klesha, where does he exist? Where does he exist? He's not affected by klesha and karma, so he doesn't exist in samsara. Where does he exist? It's an obvious question. We don't get any answer to that from Patanjali. That's why Vedanta says only scripture can answer those kinds of questions.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're going to end up with all kinds of problems. And Vedanta sets out to expose the problems in the other schools. That's what they do in entire chapter 2. They're not just shooting wildly. Anything that contradicts their Brahman as the cause of everything, they are going to object to any aspect of the Buddhists, of the Jains, and all other schools. They make lots of things they say, but anything they say that goes against their foundational truth, that intelligent Brahman is the cause, material and efficient cause of everything, they will then, in chapter 2, show how those, from their point of view, those other positions are incoherent.
And am I also remembering correctly that the Bhagavad Gita is read differently by Ramanuja and Shankara, and they've written commentaries on it?
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah,
But,
okay.
Shankara has a hard time with the Gita because it's full of action and bhakti and karma and the world. Nowhere does it, the gunas, nowhere does it say it's unreal. So Shankara will say all of that is good, but it's all conventional, illusory reality.
So how does he deal with when Krishna says, that I'm the God of gods and I'm behind everything?
That's what Ramanuja is going to say. The Gita is very clear about Krishna being the supreme. So his opponents are going to say he's not reading the text. He's not respecting the literal meaning of the text. Krishna says, "I'm beyond Brahman, but
Right.
Brahmano, Brahmabhuta. I'm the foundation of Brahman." Shankara, all of that is going to say is all part of conventional reality. That's every time there's anything to do with action or individuals or gods, it's all conventional. We can't say it's wrong,
Right.
because it's sacred text. So you say it's right within the world of conventional reality, but beyond that is the ultimate world, formless, qualityless, individualityness, Brahman.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Zoldan.
Yes, hello. So
Hello.
the question is,
Yeah.
if Brahman is the material cause, doesn't that mean that there's change in Brahman?
Well, not for Ramanuja, because he would say the change is in the body, not in the. Remember, there's tripartite Brahman. So therefore, any kind of change or suffering or imperfection, he can relegate it to Brahman as the world, not affecting Brahman itself.
How how does this work with the Satkayavada?
Well, because he would say it's all Brahman, and he would accept the whole, Sankhya model for the third of Brahman, that is the world, but he would say that nonetheless it's an eternal. So he wouldn't really. It's not really Satkara, because Satkara is when something comes out of something else, whereas the world is eternal. But it's a part of Brahman. It's an aspect of Brahman, like the light is to the sun, and therefore change is going on in the light. So, I think that's a fair question, But anyway, that's how he would answer it. He would say that any kind of change and all of that's going on but is that Satkarya Vad? He wouldn't actually, material cause means that Brahman is eternally it's an eternal aspect of Brahman. So in that sense, it's not some completely different material. Like there's the other school of Vaisheshikas, okay, and Nyaya, the two of the 6 schools, right? Now in Nyaya, Ishvara there are 7 categories of things, and they're all eternal and independent. So there is the soul, then there is, atoms, then there's qualities, and then there's motion, but we don't have to get into it all. And when they come together, so it's not Satkarya, it's the opposite. Satkarya is when one thing the clay makes the pot. Nyaya is going to say, and I'll get to your question in a second. Nyaya is going to say, look, hang on a minute. If you have clay and you make a pot, you can't say that's identical. The pot, first of all, the pot has a shape, the clay doesn't. Second of all, you have to inject motion into the clay. So you have to bring in motion from the outside to put into the clay. It's motion's not in the clay, otherwise it would always be popping out pots. And so therefore we have to accept there are different categories of things, motion, qualities. Okay, so the soul is one of those categories, and Ishvara is the supreme soul, different from the other souls, but he is not the material cause, but he's the efficient cause. He brings them all together under the rubric of karma. So that's what so I know Ramanuja is quoting yoga as actually proposing that, but really Nyaya is proposing that in terms of the text that we have. Okay, so Ramanuja is not going to say that Ishvara and these things are completely different things, and that Ishvara brings them together. That's too dualistic for him. So therefore, he's going to say they're not completely distinct. They're kind of energies or shaktis or extensions, if you will. And so in that sense, he can still preserve a bit of Satkaryavad insofar, not that that these things are eternal, but they're eternally dependent on a support. So so maybe it gets a bit tricky, and maybe maybe you're not finding it very satisfactory, but he says something like that. It's a material cause insofar as Brahman is the sustainer, and these are shaktis. They're like the light of the sun. In that way, they're not separable. You can't separate the light from the sun. You can say that's a bit too Satkaryavad, the light and the sun, but something heading in that direction.
Okay, thank you. And this goes with the Punam mantra, like how there's no changingness.
Well, I mean, remember that for Ramanuja, the liberated soul, God abides in the eternal spiritual realm in Brahma, in Saguna Brahman, that within Brahman, nothing to do with Prakriti, everything is pure consciousness, but there is eternal change, but so he would question the idea that change means non-eternality because because everything is consciousness. So in that sense, it remains eternally consciousness, but within consciousness, there's eternal change. And because love and bhakti is not a static thing, it's a very active thing. And there is constantly infinitely variegated modalities of relationship. So he would say material things, if they change, are non-eternal. But think about this then. Even a pot, in one sense, it's subject to change because it comes out of clay and it goes back. But the gunas are eternal. So actually, the gunas are eternal, but always changing, apart from the period. So actually, even though Sankhya is not going to come out and say it, the fact is they accept an eternal Prakriti which is eternally changing. So if an eternal Prakriti can be eternally changing, why can't an eternal Brahman also be eternally changing in the divine realm for those that seek Bhagavan and an eternal relationship with Bhagavan? Think about that. Sankhya has to accept. They don't come out. I've never seen this discussed. But I think I put it in the back of my Yoga Sutra book. I have 4 things, like an appendix, that I think were not resolved by or not engaged by yoga. And one of them is, but anyway, Prakriti itself is considered to be eternal but ever changing. So therefore, the idea that eternality equals non-change is not who actually accepts that? Sankhya doesn't actually practically de facto accept that.
Isn't the avyakta part, which is non-changing and eternal, and the prakriti part, which is manifesting, is changing and non-eternal?
Yeah, but it's not like 2 different things. The avyakta becomes the vyakta. It's not that there's a Vyakta and then there's Vyakta and the Vyakta still there. No, the Avyakta has become the Avyakta has become the Vyakta. And then it goes back to the Avyakta. So therefore the Avyakta, which is eternal, is also changing when it becomes the Vyakta. So therefore that whole equation of eternality meaning non-change is not, even though Sankhya doesn't go there, it de facto is it's undermining that by the idea that Prakriti, number one, is eternal, and number two, always changing, at least when it's, you know, in between the cycles.
Thank you.
Yeah, think about that. So you're not going to get answers to many of these things. Many of these things we're not going to get answers. So you really, what is the spiritual path? Our samskaras are attracted for whatever reason to one of these many options. And what can I say? You can't do better than that. Either you give up and say, oh, they're all mental constructs, I'm not going to do anything. Well, then good luck with that when you're in a moment of death. Or you say, okay, I think, there's something, there has to be some truth. And that, if you're like me, you believe that there is a real deep purpose in life. And we can maybe not understand the entirety of it, but we can certainly, certainly the goal of life is to somehow or other approach that truth. And then according to our samskaras, one thing is going to make more sense than the other. For me, it's obvious. It's, so each school has foundational truths, non-negotiable, right? So Vedanta, we saw, Brahman, that's non-negotiable. And, even Patanjali, right? What his non-negotiable truth is that there is a seer. He doesn't even argue for it. There's a seer. If you chitta vijinaroda, then this svarupe vastanam. He doesn't argue for it. It's a foundational truth. My foundational truth is that I'm a non-material, consciousness is non-material. There's no way you can make any sense to say that consciousness is coming from some combination of subatomic particles. Number one. Number two, I am not in any way the ultimate truth, because if I was, I wouldn't be in Maya. So there is intelligence behind it all. So there's an intelligent being, supremely intelligent. I'm a non-material entity. There's a supreme being. And the goal of my life is to somehow or other to use all my resources to approach and understand that supreme being. And for me, you can't beat Krishna. What are you going to do? So, but others were going to make different kinds of, there are some skaras that are going to be attracted to something else.
So my last question is for Ramanuja, the Atman is when there's difference when it's liberated or in bondage, and the change it is in Atman, or for example in Sankhya the Prakriti is bound, not the Atman. And for Ramanuja, how is these things? How are these things?
Well, Sankhya comes out and says that at the end, right? Nobody's bound, nobody, right? But I mean, it's kind of hard to defend that, but okay, fine. Really, the point it's making there is that, anyway, the question is, what is Ramanuja? No, it's a real bondage. We read that. It's under Maya. And when it becomes free by bhakti and approaching God, because God takes away that Maya, because Maya is a Shakti of Bhagavan. So that's the whole point. Krishna says in Gita, Devi hi Saguna Mayi, Mama Maya, Duratya, Mameva ye prapadyante, Maya meta. You surrender to me. This is my Maya. What is Maya anyway? The three gunas. It's not like there's three gunas and Maya something else. Maya equals three gunas, equals Prakriti, equals Pradhana, equals Avyakta. They're all synonyms. So then Krishna says, well, Shankara has a problem explaining, well, what is this Maya then? Why is it there? What is it? What's its relationship with Brahman? He just says anivachaniya. You can't. It's beyond comprehension. Well, not everyone's going to be satisfied with that. But Ramanuja, the Vaishnavas say, Maya is a real Shakti of Bhagavan, like the heat is a Shakti of the sun. And therefore, if it's a Shakti of Bhagavan, Gita says this explicitly, no question of any confusion. It's my Maya, it's made of the three gunas. If you surrender to me, you will very quickly overcome it. So that's grace. Even Patanjali sort of says that. He says, Ishvara Samadhi Siddh, here, he can give it to you. So that to me is just, is so foundationally obvious that there is a God, that I am a non-material entity, that I am not the supreme, not just now, but I never ever could ever be, because I'm trapped in Maya. So the supreme could never be trapped by Maya. And therefore, bhakti is obvious. So then the only question is, well, which modality? Well, there's Christian and there's Jewish and there's Islamic and there's so many. And then, you know, what are you going to do? Then you become attracted to one modality or the other.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tim, thank you. Good questions. Tim, you got to take him, your, you got to, yeah. Well, I can vague, do you have a volume thing or? I can, I mean, there's a little bit of, but totally inaudible, but it's a volume thing, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna type it.
No, just go ahead, just yell.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if the purpose of the Brahma Sutras was to clarify the Upanishads, why was it written in such an ambiguous and unclear way?
Tim, that's the best question anybody's asked. I don't have an answer for that.
And why has anybody tried to write like a new one? Why is all this attention being given to interpreting the Brahma Sutras rather than looking again at the Upanishads and trying to explain them in a more clear way?
Well, because you can't do that with the Upanishads. That's why the Vedanta Sutra, if you went along, if you know, they're non-systematic. And the problem is anybody that says, like there's a book called, you know, we use a book called, you know, Badarayan's Brahma Sutras, and the author says, okay, I'm going to read the Vedanta Sutra, and I'm not going to, you know, and I'm going to just I'm objectively going to just look at the sutras and then and see which of the commentators is closer to the sutras. And he sets out to do this, and he's, you know, it's not Shankara at all. Because nowhere in any one, no sutra says the world is unreal and there's two levels of reality. No sutra, no Upanishadic passage says that. So he doesn't have he's not, you know, he doesn't find Shankara convincing, but he finds, you know, Madhva at times, and it's definitely, you know, the idea that there's a real soul, real world, definitely thinks that that's the intent of the Vedanta Sutra. But, you know, an opponent's going to say, well, he's just protecting his predispositions on the text. No one's going to, anybody that says, okay, I am going to just look at the original text, none of this commentarial stuff, none of this lineage stuff, I'm just going to see what the text says, you know.
But isn't that what Vyasa did?
Vyasa did that. He wrote the Vedanta Sutra, but you just said it. The Vedanta Sutra is completely incomprehensible.
Right. So why didn't somebody like the next century try to redo what Vyasa did?
Well, that's what Shankara is the next. Well, there were other commentators before Shankara, but we've lost them all. So there's a lineage. I mean, the Vedanta Sutras themselves talk about previous commentators. And then Shankara talks about previous commentators of the Vedanta. The Vedanta talks about its previous commentators. So masses of stuff is lost. But the point is, any commentator stands the risk of being accused of being partisan. We don't have this problem with yoga, by the way. The Yoga Sutras, the commentators are all pretty much in agreement with each other. They don't argue. They don't have major differences like Vedanta. So this is a problem of Vedanta, not a problem of most scholars who are not in a lineage think that Ramanuja's is no doubt closer to the original intention of the Vedanta, that there is what they call Beda, difference and non-difference. That there is, Brahman is everything, but there are differences within Brahman, which is basically what Ramanuja is saying. So most academic scholars who are not already Advaita, or not already predisposed to Advaita, are going to say Ramanuja's, closer to the original intention. But, why didn't he write something clear? I don't have an answer to that. I don't have an answer, Tim. I don't have an answer.
Okay.
It's incredibly frustrating because Badarayan is claiming to systematize the Upanishads, he just makes a bigger problem. He makes a bigger, he creates a text which creates even further differences. So that's why I was very disappointed with Vedanta when I first started studying it.
Got it.
And
Thanks.
it's definitely it's not a text that I read to nourish my spiritual path, not at all. It's nice to read it with students once in a while. But I don't feel it's in any way is it anything that's going to contribute to my spiritual path. But anyway, I don't. There is no answer. Why didn't Badarayana? No, who can answer that question? Well, you can't climb into the head of Badarayana. But remember, there were from the time of the Brahma Sutras to Shankara, there were lineages. It's just they were all lost. They're all lost. So the first commentary we have is the 8th, 9th century Shankara. The Brahma Sutras are written centuries earlier, and they were lineages. We just don't have them. All right, my friends. Rhonda, we'll make Rhonda do I need to read any of the chats? Oops, where are the chats? I don't have, you know what? I'm not.
Mine is just real quick.
Yeah. What happened to you? Where did everybody go?
Well, that's the thing. More than half of the people went away.
No, but I've lost my screen. Go ahead, Rhonda. I can't see you.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, here listening to all this, it also reminds me of when I was studying the Trinity.
Yeah.
God the Father and the Holy Spirit, and studying it over a few hundred years of what the church felt and all the different rules about it and all the conflicts and disagreements and people burned at the stake because they thought different at different times. And I mean, it kind of sounds like the same sort of problem of trying to explain creation.
Yeah. And to explain the sacred texts.
Yeah.
In a way that's systematic. And yes, that's the problem. So then Patanjali comes along and just says, look, you notice Patanjali never quotes not a single verse. He just says, look, Chittavritti Nirodha. Do your Svadhyaya, right? You do Svadhyaya as the second thing in Kriya Yoga. And he's not saying don't do it, but that's not his method. Maybe for these kinds of reasons. Your Svadhyaya are, what are you going to, you read Shankara and then Ramanuja, and then where do you end up? So yeah,
And
I
then
don't know what to tell you.
it seems like really most all traditions, when you get into them, within them have conflicts of trying to explain the same thing.
Yes.
In their lineage.
Yeah, and maybe it should be that way because why, the mind is limited. So then you just practice. Either you do a Patanjali practice and try to realize your own self, or you do some kind of bhakti type of thing to connect to a higher self. It depends on whether you believe there is a higher self, the eternal higher self. If you believe that, then it makes sense to find some way, some bhakti, some kind of a method to develop that relationship and seek grace and so forth. And if you don't believe in a higher being and you think you're the ultimate truth, then Patanjali gives a very nice method. It's not theological, it's not arguing, not debating anybody, no text that doesn't interpret a single text, doesn't quote a single Upanishad, straightforward. Ata yoga nushasanam chittavritti nirodha tadadrashtu sarupe vastanam. You want it there, that's what, take it. So if one doesn't have to, it's the theologians that have to do this, and teachers have to do it. If you're going to teach, you have to situate your subject in the larger intellectual world. I mean, maybe not all teachers have to do that, but some do. So if that's all just a waste of time, that's fair enough. And then what? Either either seek your Atman or seek Bhagavan. Forget about all the complicated textual interpretation. Just do a simple Chittavritti Nirodha practice if you seek your own Atman, or find some kind of bhakti practice if you accept there is a being greater than you. and just do a simple path, and don't get bogged down with all of this differences. The early church fathers, 400 years before Nicaea. I mean, it's quite fascinating, and it gets very political. Athanasius, and he has the ear of the emperor, and yes, all of that. And was Christ a human? Was he God? What the heck? What? All of this. So that's yeah. But you can be a simple Christian and give your heart to Jesus of Nazareth and not have anything to do with any of that. And
Right.
Christ gives very simple ways of doing that. So the Gita gives us very simple kind of karma yoga instructions. Patanjali gives us a more nirodha practice, if you seek your own Atman, and you can just do that. Absolutely. I mean, I do, well, anyway, that's another story. I don't disagree with that, Rhonda. So, but it shouldn't discourage us from a spiritual path.
Well, yeah, and I find it interesting, the more, studying the whole civilizations and the time period and different thoughts, it is fascinating. And I often say to myself, it's like anyone can drive a car, at a certain time in life. They don't need to know everything about the engine to drive the car. But the more you know, the more you're capable. If you're interested, you can find out everything you want to know. And does it really change how you drive the car? Maybe a little, maybe not, but a lot of people are happy just to get in the car and drive.
Yes. And we'll end with this, Rhonda, but nonetheless, there's a certain metaphysics about driving a car. Number one, that you're not the car, you're different from the car. So there's a dualism between the car and you. Number two, you get in the car, you're going somewhere. So therefore, apply that to life. Fine, there's all of this, but I mean, who do we think we are? And what do we think the goal of life is? At some point, whether consciously or unconsciously, we're using our life for something. We understand ourselves in some sort of a way. Okay, I think I'm body mind. I'm not interested in religion or philosophy. I'm body mind. I want to enjoy the world while I can. That's a philosophy of life. That's an understanding of the self. So we can't avoid that, whether we consciously analyze it or don't. So we still have the problem of who are we and what is the point of our life? The clock is ticking. And if, like me, you believe you're a non-material entity, number one. Number two, there's a higher power, that there must be a higher power. And number three, if your foundational truths are that somehow life is meant to approach and explore to whatever limited extent that higher power, then that's what you're going to use your life for. So we can't get away from having some kind of a metaphysical understanding of what the world is, and some kind of understanding of who we are, and some kind of understanding of what the purpose of life is. Maybe these texts are just meant to encourage us and help us to think, by looking at these different points of view and taking them seriously, to think more about, well, what do I believe and who do I think I am and what am I going to do with the rest of my life? So, and maybe that's,
No, thank you. That's why I'm here. That's exactly why I'm here. And probably everyone else is here for that too.
Thank you, Rhonda. Good night, everybody. You know that we're not meeting for 6 weeks, yeah? If you get confused about the dates, and don't ask me because I'm confused too, but they're on the website. But I think the second week or third week of March, but but it's up there. Okay, everybody?
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a wonderful trip.
Enjoy your
Thank
trip.
you.
Good
Have
night.
a wonderful trip.
Thank you.